For a time, Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland, and we're a much larger area at risk from downpours than during Sunday. It will be a warmer night as well across the board, with temperatures in some towns and cities in the south staying in the high teens potentially. Sunday then starts with showers across western Scotland, many other places dry, and many will stay that way through the
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Happy Friday, one and all. It's 8 o'clock on television, on radio and online in the United Kingdom and across the world. This is Mark Dolan Tonight. Coming up, Tory turmoil as Bojo supporter Nadine Dorries sensationally resigns as an MP with immediate effect, causing a major headache for Rishi Sunak and a by-election that they could lose. We'll get instant reaction to this bombshell story from Boris Johnson's biographer, Tom Bauer. Supermarket weep. Aldi ditch their staff and leave the elderly behind with a hellish, dystopian, digital-only shop. You only get into the store if you've got a phone and a horrible Chinese code. I'll get angry reaction shortly. And as they perform a screeching £28 billion U-turn on green policies, can Labour be trusted with the keys to number 10? And after 9, why Joe Biden should step down on health grounds, and my verdict on Prince Harry's needless court case against our excellent newspaper industry. It's going to be a cracking night, 3 busy hours to come. Let's start with the headlines and Ray Addison.
Thanks, Mark. Good evening. Now, in the last hour, the US Justice Department has unsealed details of the 37 criminal charges facing former US President Donald Trump over his handling of classified information. Now, they include keeping sensitive military and nuclear documents and conspiracy to obstruct justice. If found guilty, he could face up to 20 years in prison. It's the second time that Donald Trump has been indicted, but he's the first former president to face criminal charges on a federal level. Trump is accusing the government of election interference in his campaign to return to the White House in 2024. Boris Johnson's resignation honours list has been published, and on it are close allies of the former Prime Minister. Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary, receives a damehood. Former Business Secretary and GBNews presenter Jacob Rees-Mogg receives a knighthood. Sean Bailey, a London Assembly member and former mayoral candidate, has been handed a peerage and will now sit in the House of Lords. Conservative MPs Conor Burns and Michael Fabricant also received knighthoods. Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner has criticised the list, calling it a sickening insult. However, Jacob Rees-Mogg has told us it's an opportunity for an outgoing PM to show their appreciation.
Outgoing Prime Minister has done a great service to the country, whether you agree with his politics or not. Being Prime Minister is a very important role, it's a very hard-working role, and that for a Prime Minister to be able to say thank you to those people who have helped make his job a little bit easier is, I think, perfectly reasonable.
Those not on the list include former Minister Nadine Dorries, and just an hour before it was published, she announced that she was stepping down with immediate effect as an MP. In a statement on Twitter, she said it had been an honour to serve her constituency of Mid-Bedfordshire, but it was time for someone younger to take the reins. French President Emmanuel Macron has been to the town of Annecy a day after a knife attack took place in a playground. Earlier, he met victims of the attack being treated in hospital, including an injured British girl. 3-year-old Etty was one of 4 toddlers stabbed. She's now said to be in a stable condition. The city's mayor says he's confident about the condition of the other 3 as well. 2 adults were also injured. The knifeman, a Syrian refugee, had been denied asylum in the country just days before that attack. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Back now to Mark Dolan.
Thanks, Ray. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. Coming up, Tory turmoil as Bojo supporter Nadine Dorries sensationally resigns as an MP, causing a major headache for Rishi Sunak and a by-election that they could lose. We'll get instant reaction to this bombshell story from Boris Johnson's biographer Tom Bauer. Also with top celebs including Prince Harry, Ian Wright and Cheryl Cole in court, I'll be asking top royal insider and victim of press intrusion herself, Lady Victoria Hervey, whether Fleet Street has gone too far this time. Also, has the tragic stabbing of 4 children in France, including a British toddler, been wrongly politicised? And what about this? Supermarket weep. Aldi ditch their staff and leave the elderly behind with a digital-only shop. Essentially, you only get into the store through these terrifying gates if you've got a phone and a Chinese communist-style code. Horrific stuff. I'll get angry reaction in just a moment. And as they perform a screeching £28 billion U-turn on green policies, can Labour be trusted with the keys to number 10? I'll be asking you, the great British public, in another instalment of Dial Dolan. In my Take at 10, my first reaction to Prince Harry's needless court case against our excellent newspaper industry, I'll be dealing with the world's least happy millionaire in no uncertain terms. That's at 10 o'clock. You won't want to miss it. Plus your emails, mark@gbnews.com. Lots to get through. Let's start with this. So huge political news, and former Conservative Minister Nadine Dorries has announced she is standing down as an MP. The former Culture Secretary and close ally of Boris Johnson said she was going to step down with immediate effect after something significant happened to change her mind. It means there will be a by-election in her mid-Bedfordshire constituency where she has a majority of over 24,000. Now, that may sound like a healthy majority, but not under the current circumstances for the Conservatives, with Labour so far ahead in the polls. Her resignation came ahead of the publication of Mr Johnson's resignation honours list. Ms Dorries had been expected to be nominated for an honour, but she was not included on the list. Is that why she is now stepping down? Let's get reaction from journalist and best-selling author of Boris Johnson, the Gambler, a stunning biography of our former Prime Minister, Tom Bauer. Now, Tom, a major headache for the Prime Minister and a by-election he doesn't need.
Well, it is. On the other hand, it's a good litmus test. He's got a good chance now of seeing whether his machinery and whether the policies in the past few weeks are resonating with the public. And my feeling is that the Tories are slowly coming back, that the economy is turning. Unlike the Eurozone, we're not in recession. Our inflation rate is lower. He's done a good deal in America. I think that Rishi Sunak is looking much better than one could have anticipated 6 months ago. So it's a good moment to actually put it to the test in a seat like Mid-Beds.
Now, Boris Johnson has rewarded his mates, gongs for Priti Patel and Jacob Rees-Mogg. Boris looking after his friends. Is this in character, Tom?
Well, it is, unfortunately, but it's not unusual. But at least his father isn't on the list for a knighthood. I mean, there is a small blessing there. But, it's a resignation honours list, and I don't think that whether it was Blair or Brown or Cameron, they all put their mates into that list because those are people who are loyal to them. I think Nadine Dorries, unfortunately, has been unwise in her reaction today. That is a sadness because she does have qualities, but she looks like a bad loser. And that isn't a nice image to portray at the end of your career in politics.
Do we know why Nadine Dorries, or specifically Stanley Johnson, were denied honours? Can we speculate, Tom?
Well, we know that Stanley Johnson, it was an outrage to give him an honour after his terrible conduct towards his wife throughout their marriage. And also this alleged smacking of Caroline Noakes' bottom. But I think Nadine Dorries clearly was asked to wait until the end of the period so there wouldn't be a by-election. And in an act of petulance, I suppose, she said, no, I won't wait, and I'm going now. The problem with Nadine Dorries is that she's a very, very attractive personality, but she really did irritate the lovies and the literary and the cultural artistic establishment. And that, unfortunately, has cost the Tories a lot of support because they were very, very popular during the lockdown for giving a lot of support to the cultural community and a lot of money. And that support has been squandered by Nadine Dorries, unfortunately, because of the way that she's presented her policies. And now today, she reveals, unfortunately, her real characteristic, which is a lack of patience.
Well, yes, and was it a lack of judgment on the part of Boris Johnson to promote her so enthusiastically, causing potentially reputational damage to the Conservative Party?
Well, there's no one who's done more reputational damage to the Conservative Party, unfortunately, than Boris and Liz Truss. So I suppose Nadine Dorries is a minor player in that league.
Briefly,
No,
Tom, there are lots of... Tom, sorry to interrupt you. Tom, sorry to interrupt you, but there are plenty of sort of political neutrals who just think Nadine Dorries is a bit bonkers, don't they? She's responsible for those strange early morning interviews on the BBC that go viral, and she says some pretty out there things.
She does, and that's true. But, a colourful politician doesn't always mean a bad politician. The problem has been that she has pursued policies which have really annoyed too many people. Like, for example, it was a good idea to have levelling up in culture and arts. But the way it was introduced and has been executed by the Arts Council has been disastrous for the government. And it was silly of her to imagine that selling off Channel 4 would be popular. And of course, it's now been dumped.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. She lacks wisdom, as we've seen today. And Boris liked her, but that was no reason to give her a job, I suppose.
Yes, too many unforced errors. Tom, what of Boris's role in the run-up to the next election? Will he be a help or a hindrance to the Prime Minister? Does he even want Sunak to win the next election?
Well, that is a great problem. And it's very sad that Boris seems to be wanting to wage war against the Prime Minister when he should be doing the opposite, which is to show absolute loyalty and show that he wants a Tory government returned next year. But I fear that he is motivated by spite and anger, and he blames Rishi Sunak for his downfall when, in fact, he was responsible for his own downfall. And unfortunately, there's no one at the moment to control him, to tell him, stop, Boris, just see that you've got to be loyal and be quiet for a year. Let Rishi try and win, let him try and stem the losses which could otherwise result to a party in disarray. But I think there's a bit of time to play still. I think that Boris could still be persuaded to be mature and loyal, and that's to be seen in the next few weeks.
Boris might be mature and loyal, but possibly not Team Johnson, who loathe, don't they, Rishi Sunak. Now, Tom, Boris Johnson would win a by-election in his Uxbridge and South Ruislip constituency if one was held tomorrow, according to pollster and former Tory party donor Lord Ashcroft. So the ex-Prime Minister could be forced to face a vote in his London constituency under a worst-case scenario relating to the Privileges Committee inquiry into whether he lied to Parliament over COVID rule-breaking in Number 10. In your book, Tom, you call him the gambler, but he looks to be very much the survivor too. We can't write him off just yet, can we?
Absolutely not. He gambles to survive. He faces the most appalling odds and always emerges in one way or another on top. And that's the whole tenor of my biography of him. And I think that he'd be a very foolish person to write Boris off because he will always fight to come back. Uxbridge is one thought, but he's very welcome, I think, to go back to Henley.
Tom, let me interrupt you. Let me interrupt you because we're going straight over to our Bulletins team for some breaking news.
Thanks, Mark. And yes, in the last couple of minutes, Boris Johnson has announced that he will be resigning as an MP after accusing a Commons investigation into whether he misled Parliament over Partygate of attempting to drive me out, the former Prime Minister has said in a statement. He said he was quitting his seat and triggering an immediate by-election because he was, quote, bewildered and appalled at the Privileges Committee investigation into him. He said he'd received a letter from the committee which is investigating whether he lied to MPs over Partygate, making it clear, much to my amazement, this is Boris Johnson's words, that they are determined to use the proceedings against me to drive me out of Parliament. He also said, I have today written to my association in Uxbridge and South Ruislip to say that I'm stepping down forthwith and triggering an immediate by-election. I'm very sorry to leave my wonderful constituency. It has been a huge honour to serve both them, both as Mayor and MP. Now, he added, it's very sad to be leaving Parliament, at least for now, but above all, I am bewildered and appalled that I can be forced out anti-democratically by a committee chaired and managed by Harriet Harman with such egregious bias. The statement from Boris Johnson announcing in the last couple of minutes that he is resigning as an MP and triggering an immediate by-election. Back to you, Mark.
Well, if you are just joining us, that is a stunning political bombshell. Boris Johnson has stepped down as an MP. He will leave the Commons. There will be a by-election in his Uxbridge and South Ruislip constituency. It's a bombshell. It's a massive headache for Rishi Sunak. What does it mean for Boris Johnson's political future? Well, with good fortune, I'm currently joined by his biographer and political commentator, best-selling author Tom Bauer. Tom, your instant reaction to this stunning news, we didn't see that coming, did we? Boris Johnson to step down as an MP and leave Parliament within weeks.
Well, we nearly did, Mark. I mean, we're on the verge of saying it. I was saying that if he was forced to leave Uxbridge, I think Henley, his old seat, would welcome him back. And I think that's what his plan is. His gamble is he'll resign from Uxbridge. The Tories will probably lose it. And Henley is looking for an MP. They'd welcome him back and he could return to Parliament next year. And that would suit him fine because he needs a year to write his memoirs and earn his money there. And in the meantime, he can restore his credibility. So it was, funny enough, we were heading towards that before we heard the news. He is a gambler. He's a fighter. And this is all about Boris Johnson part 13 or whatever in this astonishing saga. We can't write him off at all.
We're going to need another book. Tom Bauer, with this astonishing developing story, do you mind staying with us over the break and we'll come straight back to you?
Fine.
Thank you, my thanks to Tom Bauer, best-selling author, of course, biographer of Boris Johnson. If you're just joining us, stunning news. Boris Johnson stepping down as an MP. He's going to be out of the Commons within weeks. A big headache for Rishi Sunak. We will look at the implications of this remarkable development after this.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Davies & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you're joining us, a huge political story is developing. The former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced he is standing down as an MP with immediate effect. This hot on the heels of former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries doing exactly the same thing. What has motivated this decision? Well, so far, all we're hearing in a statement from the ex-PM is as follows. I have written to my association in Uxbridge and South Ruislip to say that I'm stepping down forthwith and triggering an immediate by-election. Now, is this an assault on the premiership of Rishi Sunak? Is it his departure from frontline politics, or does he have a plan? Now, I'm delighted to say that joining me for reaction to this massive story, this bombshell on a Friday night that not many saw coming, we have Boris Johnson's biographer, Tom Bauer, the author of The Gambler, and we'll catch up with Catherine Forster, our political correspondent, in just a moment. Tom, going back to what you said earlier, could this be an example of Johnson's opportunism?
Yes, absolutely. There's a plan. I mean, there's no doubt that he has been heavily censured by the committee, and it was a stitch-up from the beginning because Harriet Harman, the chairman, clearly wanted him punished, and she made no secret of that, and nor did Bernard Jenkins, the Tory MP. But there we are. He's now got what many predicted was going to happen, and he is taking the horns, holding the horns and the bull by the horns, because it absolutely determined that he's going to come out of this on the front foot. My guess is that he will probably stand for Parliament for Henley, because that's a safe seat. But in the meantime, he will try to agitate to prove himself right. And his real problem is that he doesn't have round him the sort of people to give him good advice. And he needs a team. He needs to rebuild his team. And that's going to have to happen in the next few months.
Tom, stay with us, if you will. I'm very grateful for your time on a Friday night. I think you'll agree that this massive story is worthy of further analysis. So Tom Bauer in just a moment. But let's go straight now to our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Catherine, did many see this coming?
No, frankly. I think when we knew yesterday that the Privileges Committee report had been passed to Boris Johnson, obviously we knew he had 2 weeks to respond. But I suspect that the Conservative Party certainly would have hoped that the recommended suspension, if there was one, would be less than 10 days, because what in fact they have recommended, more than 10 days in a by-election, is going now to create absolute chaos. And although Boris Johnson has resigned as an MP with immediate effect, there will be a by-election in Uxbridge and South Ruislip. This is going to create a whole world of pain for Rishi Sunak, because what it does is it reopens all this psychodrama and the Conservative Party basically eating itself alive that we've seen over the last year or so. So Rishi Sunak began the day hoping to avoid by-elections with a resignation honours list, etc. The end of the day, facing two by-elections, the Lib Dems think they can take Nadine Dorris's seat. Labour think that they can take Boris Johnson's seat. And also, of course, Boris Johnson is doing the absolute opposite of going quietly. He is going down and pretty much trying to take a lot of people with him. I mean, he says we're very sad to be leaving Parliament, at least for now. So straight away, the indication that this may be just a temporary setback, a temporary stepping back from politics. He could be coming back, just as he did when he actually resigned, hinted at a return, and then goes on to say, you know, that he is bewildered and appalled. He says he's been forced out anti-democratically. So I think now the very sort of bit of a lid that Rishi Sunak has managed to keep on the various warring factions within the Conservative Party, I suspect this is all going to come out now, pouring forth in a very unpleasant way. And I would imagine that Keir Starmer is going to be very, very pleased watching this.
Yes, Catherine, stay with us. We can bring Tom Bauer back, Boris Johnson's biographer. Tom, what do you make of the tone of Boris Johnson's statement? Is that anger sincere or confected for political ends?
Oh, I think it's sincere. I mean, he is absolutely appalled. He didn't think that he was going to be forced out by a punishment of over 10 days. But he should have listened more carefully to what the committee was saying. I mean, he had no friends on that committee. They were determined to punish him and punish him very brutally. The only difference I would take from your political editor is this. that I don't think that the Tory party is going to react in such a way to divide itself over this. I think they see in this a chance to put Partygate and all the horrors of that behind them, because the main victim or the main proponent of Partygate is out of the Commons. He's out of politics until the next general election. So there is a chance, in my view, that this could be a blessing in disguise. Boris is not going to be a player in the Commons for the foreseeable future, and his return will depend on Central Office approving him as an alternative candidate when it comes to Henley. And there aren't, with Nadine Dorries is gone, and Jacob Rees-Mogg, I don't think he'll be very vocal in opposing Rishi. There's a chance that he'll be able to get over it by Monday.
Catherine, does this departure of Boris Johnson from the House of Commons absolve him of any ongoing punishment from the Privileges Committee? Does this zero out the scoreboard?
Well, I suppose it does, because he's taken matters into his own hands. I mean, they could have suspended him for 10 days.
Now, we've just lost the line to Catherine Forster there. Now, Tom, let me come back to you whilst we reconnect with Catherine. Can we talk about Boris Johnson's future? If the Conservatives collapse at the next election, but Boris wins an alternative seat, such as Henley, is there a conceivable path for him back to number 10?
Absolutely, yes. And I think that must be part of his thinking, that if the Tories lose at the end of next year, that he would perhaps win in Henley and return as the prospective leader of the opposition, having finished his book as well. So in all of this, there is a very selfish, narcissistic calculation that he has nothing to lose by getting out now and not prolonging the agony. And there is a view of that, of course, but that's the problem with this scenario. It assumes that the Labour Party is going to win with a large majority. And there are many people who think the Tories do have a chance of getting at least in with one seat majority or a hung parliament, and nothing is fixed. So he is taking a huge gamble. He is assuming a Tory defeat and that he will return as the alternative, the man to rebuild the party for the second time, just as some of his predecessors in politics have done.
Catherine Forster, if Boris Johnson were to win an alternative seat and Rishi Sunak loses the next election, would he be a shoo-in to lead the Tories in opposition? Would he be the first choice? Would he do a Donald Trump in terms of the Republican Party and be the obvious candidate?
Well, many people would think it's unthinkable, but one thing you can say with Boris Johnson is never, never underestimate Boris Johnson and never, ever write him off, because he has incredible political powers, things that happen that you would have undone anybody else. He bounces back again and again and again. And of course, as we know, Boris Johnson will calculate what Boris Johnson thinks is best for Boris Johnson. Now, it may well be, if the Conservative Party lose the next election, that Rishi Sunak is out. It is conceivable, I think, that they could turn back to Boris Johnson, just as you've mentioned him. I was talking only this morning about both President Biden and Rishi Sunak have these blonde, predecessors who grab all the headlines and make lots of trouble. But of course, when Donald Trump went, it seemed inconceivable that he might be re-elected, especially with the Capitol riots on January the 6th. And yet here we are, despite the criminal charges being brought against him, he is the favourite. So, yeah, I can see Boris Johnson coming back, but certainly this won't be improving the Conservatives' chances of winning at the next election.
Yes, not for the first time. Boris Johnson and Donald Trump's career mirror themselves. Catherine Forster, thank you so much for jumping on the call. We'll catch up shortly. My brilliant GB News colleague, political correspondent Catherine Forster. And listen, Tom Bauer, I owe you a pint. Thank you so much for your XL contribution to the show tonight. The Biographer of Boris Johnson. Of course, he's written some of the most compelling biographies ever written. Meghan Markle, Richard Branson, you name it. But of course, it's all about Boris tonight. Tom Bauer will catch up soon. Thank you for your time. If you're just joining us, a massive political bombshell. Boris Johnson has stepped down as an MP. He will be leaving the Commons within weeks, provoking a by-election, a massive headache for Rishi Sunak. More on this massive story next.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back to the show. If you're just joining us, a political bombshell. Boris Johnson is to step down with immediate effect as an MP, sparking an unwanted by-election for the Prime Minister, one that the Tories would likely lose. Let's get further reaction to this story now with the leader of the Heritage Party, David Curtin. David, your thoughts on this?
It's a shock, isn't it, for a Friday afternoon? First Nadine Dorries standing down and then Boris Johnson. I was just expecting and hoping for a quiet weekend, but I think this is going to be big trouble for the Conservatives. They are not liked around the country because of how they've run the government and over the last 13 years with lots of things culminating. You know, if you take out, Boris Johnson from the equation, people blame them for the net zero policy. People blame them for the mass immigration that we have. People blame them perhaps also for the effects of the Ukraine conflict and how that is affecting our country as well. People blame them for the rundown in local services and the police and in the NHS and hospitals and so on. So they're not going to have a good time of it, and I think they're going to have a lot of trouble defending these 2 seats that are coming up for by-election.
Well, yes. Now, David, in an explosive and angry statement, the Prime Minister, ex-Prime Minister, I should say, Boris Johnson, has warned that the kangaroo court investigating him over Partygate is determined to find him guilty. He has accused the cross-party group of MPs of being biased and said he was bewildered and appalled that it was trying to force him out of Parliament. Do you think he's been hung out to dry? Is Boris Johnson the victim of a kangaroo court?
We don't know the sentence of this yet, as far as I understand, that if they do give a recommendation that he's suspended from Parliament for more than 10 days, then that certainly will be this committee hanging him out to dry, because then there will automatically be a by-election. So it looks like he's jumped before he's been pushed, or made the announcement before the committee makes the announcement, if you like. We still don't know what they're going to say and what actually the recommendation is. But I have a different view on this. I mean, my view is the whole governance during the lockdown period was absolutely terrible, and I think they all need to be held account, and they're all responsible for the effects of lockdown on the country. And clearly they were not worried about this, because they were partying and mixing together in Downing Street while making everybody else live alone and live under these draconian restrictions. So my own opinion is the whole lot of them are responsible. And, I would kind of say, they all need to be held to account and brought before a trial, if you like.
Well, I tend to agree with you about the disaster of lockdowns, but of course the government would argue that all the COVID measures saved many lives. It's all about opinions, isn't it? Let's get the opinions now on this developing story with our deputy political editor, Tom Harwood. And Tom, I think there's a burning question to put to you, which is Boris Johnson a greater threat to Rishi Sunak inside the House of Commons or outside of it?
I think we can see very clearly from the resignation statement that Boris Johnson has put out in the last few minutes that he is going to be a deep, deep thorn in the side of Rishi Sunak's government. I'd like to read, actually, just some lines from this statement in terms of how eviscerating it is, in terms of how Rishi Sunak is running the government. Boris Johnson writes that our party needs to urgently recapture its sense of momentum and its belief in what this country can do. Of course, implicitly saying it's lost momentum and lost belief. Boris Johnson goes on to write that we need to show how we're making the most of Brexit. Why have we so passively abandoned the prospect of a free trade deal with the US? Why have we junked measures to help people into housing, or to scrap EU directives, or to promote animal welfare? This is Boris Johnson taking piece by piece policies that he promoted as Prime Minister. Housing really stands out there to me as something that Boris Johnson promoted to reform the planning system, and now the Labour Party has taken on as their big mantle. To me, this statement reads like the sort of epitaph of a Conservative government. These will be the lines we hear. If the Conservative Party lose the election next year, Boris Johnson can very easily point to this statement, point to the abandonment of what he views as Conservative principles and ambition within governance, and say, if you'd have stuck with me, you might have won. Now, whether or not that's true, that is a narrative that Boris Johnson is clearly setting up. And I think the other thing of note in this resignation statement is he says he's very sad to be leaving Parliament, at least for now. Well, could it be that, like the Roman leader Cincinnatus that Boris Johnson referred to when he was resigning as Prime Minister on the steps of Downing Street, could it be that perhaps after another electoral cycle, perhaps when Boris Johnson is midway through his 60s, not too old an age to re-enter politics, could it be that he comes back to try and lead the Conservatives again from opposition. There are many clues in this statement to looking at what Boris Johnson is thinking right now. Perhaps not for the next year, perhaps not even for the next 5 years, but beyond that.
Yes, now, will Boris Johnson, do you think, be pushing for the Tories to lose the next election? Are we seeing stage one of a scorched earth policy against Rishi Sunak?
I don't think that Boris Johnson would want the Conservatives to lose the next election. However, it is clear that he is furious with Rishi Sunak. Indeed, he's furious with the Privileges Committee, what he views as a kangaroo court, as a biased set of individuals running that committee. Now, through that, it is clear that Boris Johnson and indeed Nadine Dorries, through their resignations today, creating these awkward by-elections for the government, are not giving the government any favours at all. Now, will Boris Johnson be happy if the Conservatives lose power, if they throw away that historic mandate that he won in 2019? I very much doubt it. However, will he be knocking on every door to try and help them win? I very much doubt that too.
Yes, Tom Harwood, stay with us. We do have the leader of a political party with us. A very timely appointment. David Curtin, the leader of the Heritage Party. What do you think this evening's developing story, this extraordinary development that Boris Johnson is to step down as an MP with immediate effect, will have on the outcome of the next election, which, of course, you'll be fighting as well?
Yeah, I certainly will be. We'll have as many candidates as we possibly can put together to stand in the next general election. But to be honest, I don't think it's going to have much of an effect on the next election, because the electorate isn't really going to remember this when it comes to next year. I mean, this is something that we'll be talking about now. It's going to be in the media cycle for a few weeks maybe. But when it comes to the next election, that will probably be autumn 2024. This will all be ancient history. And I think a lot of people around the country that I speak to have already made up their minds, and they're disillusioned with all of the main parties that are in Westminster at the moment, and they're looking for something different. And they're getting out of the mindset that we have in this country of voting Labour because they don't like Tory, and they vote for the Tories because they don't like Labour. People are looking for something new because, from my perspective anyway, the Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dem, Greens, they all seem to have coalesced into more or less having the same set of policies. They're all following the Green agenda. They're all, to some extent, following wokery and restrictions on free speech. And a lot of people have had enough of it. So I think when the next election comes around, people will be looking for something different.
OK, my thanks to the leader of the Heritage Party, David Curtin, and our deputy political editor, Tom Harwood. Look, this is a massive story if you're just joining us. Boris Johnson is to stand down as an MP with immediate effect from his Uxbridge and South Ruislip constituency. It's a very marginal seat. It's unlikely that the Tories would hold that seat, which would be a major political headache for Rishi Sunak. This off the back of the other big story of the day, that Nadine Dorries, the former Culture Secretary, is also going to leave the Commons straight away. Are they rats leaving a sinking ship? More on this in 2.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan tonight, and bang goes a quiet Friday evening. If you were going to have a drink tonight, make it a double, because Boris Johnson has just sensationally stepped down as an MP, provoking an unwanted by-election, which I think the Tories would likely lose, an absolute nightmare for Rishi Sunak, and the prospect of Boris Johnson out and about in the media, complaining and moaning about the current government. Well, there's a flavour of that in his departing statement. He has resigned as an MP, warning that the kangaroo court investigating him over Partygate is determined to find him guilty. He has said that he's bewildered and appalled that the cross-party group of MPs who are looking into his case are trying to force him out of Parliament. He says it's undemocratic. He said that the committee had still not produced a shred of evidence that he knowingly or recklessly broke the rules. Much to my amazement, says Johnson, they are determined to use the proceedings to drive me out of Parliament. That sounds like Trumpian language to me. Get the base on side, cast yourself as a victim of the establishment, and that's the path to future political glory. Let's get reaction now from my studio guest, who is a political commentator, royal insider and socialite, Lady Victoria Hervey. Now, Lady Victoria Hervey, we're going to talk about Prince Harry and his court case, but somebody else has pushed him off the agenda. It is Boris Johnson, a man that we just can't stop talking about.
I mean, what is it about Boris? I think Boris, like, compared to, just say, a lot of other politicians, he has this like own persona. I think his hair plays a big role in it, doesn't it?
Yes. It's part of his persona, isn't it? And this guy, I mean, he's not going away quietly.
No.
He will probably be more vocal outside of the Commons than in it.
Yeah, no, for sure. Look, he's incredibly intelligent, and I think there is a whole plan behind this.
I mean, his potential outside of the Commons, of course, he's got the freedom not being an MP in terms of his schedule and also not bound by any sort of party responsibilities. He can shoot from the hip, can't he? He'll go on chat shows.
Yeah.
Perhaps he'll present a show on GB News. Anything's possible.
I don't see why not, right? But I'm sure he'll be working on different projects, books, all sorts of things, and then he'll come back with a bang.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think about this? You've seen it. You lived in the States for many years, and you know about these rather iconic politicians, Obama, Trump, Clinton. You know, Johnson is in that class, isn't he? Just in terms of visibility, in terms of the rock star factor.
Yeah, I think more than actually, like, many prime ministers I can think of what we've had. Yeah, Boris is he's like a celebrity and a prime minister. Which
would you put it past him to get back into number 10 in the years ahead?
I don't put anything past someone like Boris Johnson. I think he's probably got a sneaky plan.
He may well have a sneaky plan. Well, let's get the views now of Harry Mount, who is the author of The Wit and Wisdom of Boris Johnson, of which there's plenty. Harry, thank you so much for joining us. Your reaction to this bombshell story, did you see this coming?
At all, it's completely astonishing. And in fact, the rumours going round were that the slap on the wrist not given more than 10 days. So this is absolutely... On top of it, his statement is extraordinary because his whole life has been about masking his real statement is full of people when they resign say, lying through their teeth, I support the Prime Minister massively. He doesn't even bother with that. So he's extremely... to be Prime Minister, which he obviously was. He wanted to be a great spitting blood. I'd have thought there's no chance of a comeback.
Do you think he will now try to destroy Rishi Sunak's premiership? Is he going to be a thorn in the side outside of the Commons, Harry?
I think he's too canny to do that. I'm amazed, as I say, by the anger in his statement. I think he's going to go away and trouser a huge amount of cash. He's already done quite a lot of that in the last couple of months. But he's just bought an enormous moated house in Oxfordshire, which he's got to pay for. 2 more children on top of an unknown number of children to put through expensive schools. So he's got to get a lot of money. But the thing about Boris is that he just needs to be talked about. He needs attention. Even if it's bad news, he'll love being all over the papers tomorrow morning. So he won't go away quietly. I imagine he'll finish his Shakespeare book, which he got a massive advance for, but he'll want to be sitting alongside you in a studio or another studio very soon.
Yes, and it is Shakespearean, isn't it? Do you think that he wants to re-enter politics? Do you think he still dreams of holding the keys to number 10?
I'm sure he dreams of it, and I heard rumours that as recently as February he was planning to do exactly that. But I thought even he would know the writing is on the wall. You'll remember in 2016 when he was about to stand to become Prime Minister for the first time, and he backed down when Michael Gove stabbed him. And he was quite realistic then. He bided his time. He's been written off for almost 40 years, and he's always bounced back. He'll never be quiet, but I'd have thought even he knows there's no real chance of a comeback.
So, Harry Mount, you are calling it that Boris Johnson's frontline political career, as of tonight, is over?
I would say so. People have been writing him off for years and getting it wrong, but I can't really see a way back for him now.
But what if speculation that he may go back to his old constituency of Henley? They're looking for an MP. It's a safe seat. If he is re-elected in a year's time, the Tories collapse. Surely there's an opportunity.
There's certainly an opportunity, and of course he's got every legal right to come back. I just thought the way he wrote that statement, it's so full of anger that if he was being really canny, as he often is, he would know he couldn't be that abusive and think he's going to come back at least any time soon. I could well be wrong. As I said, people always write him off. But that statement is so extremely outspoken, and it doesn't really support the Tory party, beyond saying what he really would have done if he'd stayed on as Prime Minister, that he's, I would say, willfully burnt his boats.
Lady Victoria Hervey, your reaction to the sheer anger in that statement. He has written, "I did not lie, and I believe that in their hearts the committee know it. But they have willfully chosen to ignore the truth because from the outset their purpose has not been to discover the truth or genuinely to understand what was in my mind when I spoke in the Commons. Their purpose from the beginning has been to find me guilty regardless of the facts. This is the definition of a kangaroo court. This is the language of Donald Trump, Victoria."
Is this the crazy Partygate situation that
it most certainly is, and it's
I mean,
it's
I think it is
that.
actually ridiculous. I think it is ridiculous at this point that we are still talking about Partygate. Like, it's just, I find it incredible in a bad way. It's ridiculous.
You think that actually we should have moved on from that story?
Yeah, we should have moved on from this story like years ago. Like, how are we even still discussing it?
Indeed. I mean, do you think, Victoria, that Boris Johnson is now too tainted to be hopeful of any kind of comeback?
I mean, did he really do something? I mean,
what is your view about the Prime Minister's alleged behaviour during the pandemic?
Well, I found the Partygate thing, you know, just, it's so stupid that we're still dwelling on that. I mean, so many people were breaking the rules. So... what do I think?
I mean, Victoria, do you think...
I don't think that is a big enough reason to not have him have a political career.
Victoria Hervey, listen, you've been around in the corridors of power since early in your life. Do you think that Johnson's been done up like a kipper? Is he a victim of an establishment coup?
Yeah, I would almost say he is a victim here because it's complete nonsense that they are still going on about it. I think it's just something so irrelevant at this point.
My thanks to Lady Victoria Hervey. Victoria, great to see you in the studio. And also my thanks to Harry Mount, author of The Wit and Wisdom of Boris Johnson. Thanks, Harry. More on this to come if you're just joining us. Well, it is now a Mark Dolan Tonight Tories in Turmoil special, because Boris Johnson, the iconic former leader of the party, iconic former Prime Minister, the pandemic Prime Minister, is to leave the Commons with immediate effect. We will bring you reaction from across the political spectrum. Political experts, ex-colleagues, friends and much more. You won't want to go anywhere. It is now the political story of the year.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to Mark Dolan tonight and an unprecedented Tories in Turmoil special. If you're just joining us, Boris Johnson has sensationally stepped down as an MP, leaving the House of Commons with immediate effect. This will spark a by-election, a nightmare for Rishi Sunak. The Tories will most likely lose that by-election, and Boris Johnson leaving the Commons, no doubt to cause trouble for Rishi Sunak on chat shows like this one, more books, of course, more tours, more speaking engagements. Boris Johnson now a free man leaving the Commons. He believes he's the victim of a kangaroo court. Is he the victim of an establishment coup? All of that to come. It's a massive story and you won't want to go anywhere else. We've got voices from across the political spectrum. We've got journalists, friends of Boris Johnson and foes. A busy 2 hours to come. It's a Tories in Turmoil special. First, the headlines with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Mark. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom and our top story. Boris Johnson has resigned as an MP with immediate effect, accusing the Commons investigation into whether he misled Parliament over Partygate of trying to, quote, drive him out. Stressing that he did not lie to the Commons, Mr Johnson accused the committee of expressing deeply prejudicial remarks about his guilt before they had even seen the evidence, claiming they should have recused themselves. Mr Johnson also used his resignation statement to take aim at the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak's government, saying, when I left office last year, the government was only a handful of points behind in the polls. That gap has now massively widened. His resignation will trigger a by-election in his constituency of Uxbridge and South Ruislip and comes just hours after the resignation of former Minister Nadine Dorries. Well, reaction to Boris Johnson's resignation has been swift. MP Michael Fabricant, who will receive a knighthood in Boris Johnson's resignation honours list, said the former Prime Minister had been the subject of, quote, disgraceful treatment. Meanwhile, Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner has said that the British public are sick of what she described as a never-ending Tory soap opera played out at their expense. Meanwhile, Deputy Lib Dem leader Daisy Cooper issued a statement which simply read, good riddance. Boris Johnson's statement comes just hours after the publication of his resignation honours list, which included close allies of the former Prime Minister. Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary, receives a damehood. Former Business Secretary and GB News presenter Jacob Rees-Mogg receives a knighthood. Sean Bailey, a London Assembly member and former mayoral candidate, has been handed a peerage and will now sit in the House of Lords. And Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner criticised that list, calling it a sickening insult. However, Jacob Rees-Mogg has told us it's an opportunity for an outgoing PM to show their appreciation.
Outgoing Prime Minister has done a great service to the country, whether you agree with his politics or not. Being Prime Minister is a very important role, it's a very hard-working role, and that for a Prime Minister to be able to say thank you to those people who have helped make his job a little bit easier is, I think, perfectly reasonable.
Some international news, and the US Justice Department has unsealed details of the 37 criminal charges facing former US President Donald Trump over his handling of classified information. They include keeping sensitive military and nuclear documents and conspiracy to obstruct justice. If found guilty, he could face up to 20 years in prison. It's the second time that Donald Trump has been indicted, but he's the first former president to face criminal charges on a federal level. Trump is accusing the government of election interference in his campaign to return to the White House in 2024. And French President Emmanuel Macron has been to the town of Annecy a day after a knife attack took place in a playground. Earlier, he met victims of the attack being treated in hospital, including an injured British girl, 3-year-old Etty. She was one of 4 toddlers stabbed. She's now said to be in a stable condition. The city's mayor says he's confident about the condition of the other 3. 2 adults were also injured. The knifeman, a Syrian refugee, had been denied asylum in the country just days before that attack. More on all of those stories coming up very shortly on GB News, on TV, online, on DAB+ radio. Now back to Mark.
Thanks, Ray. Well, this is a Mark Dolan Tonight Tories in Turmoil special. If you thought Nadine Dorries, the former Culture Secretary, stepping down as an MP with immediate effect was a big story, well, I'm afraid you're going to have to deal with this one. Boris Johnson is leaving the House of Commons with immediate effect. He has resigned as the MP for Uxbridge and Ruislip. That is a very marginal constituency. It's likely that the by-election that this departure provokes will be lost by Rishi Sunak, a major political headache for him. He's quit after receiving the findings of the Privileges Committee into whether he knowingly lied to his fellow MPs over Partygate. In an angry statement, he has said that the Privileges Committee has shown an egregious bias, adding that he was bewildered and appalled. He said their purpose from the beginning has been to find me guilty regardless of facts. This is the very definition of a kangaroo court. He said that he's been forced out anti-democratically by a committee chaired and managed by a Labour MP with such egregious bias. The statement continues, but look, let's get reaction now from our deputy political editor, Tom Harwood. And Tom, many Boris supporters will draw attention to this story and this handling of the committee and say that he's the victim of an establishment coup.
That's certainly how he feels. In fact, in the very second paragraph of his resignation statement, the former Prime Minister says that the committee had not been able to produce a shred of evidence against him. Now, of course, we haven't seen what the committee has sent to Boris Johnson. We don't know if we can independently verify that. We will be able to do that in not too much time, of course, because the conclusions of the committee were sent to Boris Johnson today. He has decided to resign off the back of them. We'll be able to scrutinise the very detail that they've got to here. But we do know that the frame of reference of this committee was out of the ordinary in terms of their decision to prosecute, if you want, or decide a sanction against Boris Johnson went beyond the normal realms of what a Privileges Committee investigation would do. Ordinarily, you would say you'd have to prove that someone has knowingly misled Parliament. Instead, Harriet Harman's committee changed the terms of reference to say recklessly misled Parliament. That is a much, much lower bar, one that has not been used before in Parliament. And so perhaps there we can start to see how Boris Johnson has felt that this was an unfair process against him, a kangaroo court in his words. But again, I must stress with regard to this, we haven't seen the full report or indeed the recommendations or the conclusions from the committee. It could be that they have some sort of smoking gun, although I have to say, we haven't seen it yet.
Tom, thank you so much for that. Tom Harwood is the GB News deputy political editor. Let's now speak to the next political editor of GB News, the Telegraph's brilliant Christopher Hope. Chris, do you think that Boris Johnson jumped before he was pushed?
We don't know the answer to that question, Mark, because Boris Johnson is in Nigeria, in Africa, as far as I understand it. He was certainly there yesterday. So what he's thinking, no one knows. The warning on this statement that came out tonight, as Tom was reading out there, was given with zero notice to the government's whip's office. There was no warning. It just appeared. They were digesting what to do about Nadine Dorries, who's got a difficult by-election that's now going to be created mid-Bedfordshire after she resigned. What did happen, and we know what happened, is he got a report yesterday, the findings of the Partygate report by the Privileges Committee. He had 2 weeks to read that. That was going to be published on the 22nd of June. On the 29th of June, there'll be a vote of MPs, a free vote of Tory MPs, about whether to accept the punishment he's getting or to try and do something about it and fight it. He would have had to win a lot of support there not to lose that and then face his by-election in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, and he took the honourable course now to go early, it seems. I think the surprise in Tory ranks is extraordinary. I've been told tonight that senior figures around number 10 are putting on wet towels and calming down, not panicking, because they've got a big moment here when the people who led the party to that big victory in 2019, some of the figures who led the successful EU referendum in 2016, these people are now leaving the stage. It's almost a passing of the kind of populist nature of Tory politics to the more measured ones, as was witnessed by Rishi Sunak. I think that's what we're seeing tonight. It's the end point of a period of Tory politics.
Now, they're going to need hot towels. Rishi Sunak will need smelling salts, won't he, Christopher? Of course, Boris Johnson is a threat to the Prime Minister and his chances at the next election, but so is Team Boris, and they're angry now.
They are angry, and we're seeing responses coming in from people like Peter Cruddas, Lord Cruddas of Shoreditch, who, of course, led that campaign amongst the grassroots to stop the MPs forcing out Boris Johnson in July, August last year. He failed to do that. Boris Johnson, in a statement there, says he's leaving politics for now. Now, that he likes to keep his audience waiting and excited about what he might do next. Certainly, that's what happened when he didn't take on Rishi Sunak last October for the Tory leadership. He said, "I'm not going to do it for now." So he wants to keep the audience excited. What he does next is anyone's guess. Now, a guy called Dominic Cummings, of course, we know about him, don't we? He's been writing on his Substack about the need for another right-wing party of some sort that may take shape in the next few years. Would Boris Johnson want to lead that, a party in his own image? It's been talked of before. I think talk of that will just carry on because he's basically saying goodbye for now to the Tory party. What he does next is completely fascinating.
So can we genuinely conceive the possibility that Boris Johnson could form a new breakaway right-wing party in this country?
It's an idea, and I think all bets are off on what happens next with Boris Johnson. It's been mooted before by his supporters in July last year to me. They were saying it's happened before. A couple of big donors could get behind a new kind of right-of-centre populist party which would deliver the Brexit, which maybe they thought they were campaigning for back in 2016. It's an idea, Mark. It's not happening yet. I'm just saying to you that it is the things that the tectonic plates are shifting tonight in Westminster, and things will be different next week. As things stand, of course, Rishi Sunak is now more strengthened by what's going on. He had been safe until October. There could be no new letters going in of no confidence in him because of the rule of not allowing a challenge a year after a new leader is elected. The issue of Boris Johnson, had he been cleared by privilege by then, would have been a problem for Sunak. It's not anymore. What is clear to me is he will now definitely fight the next general election. That wasn't entirely clear until now.
Yes, now I know your phone is going to be ringing hot tonight, so I'll keep it brief, Christopher. But let me just ask you, is it a presumption to say that Boris Johnson will be accepted as the prospective parliamentary candidate for his old seat of Henley, which is a safe Tory seat? Can we assume Boris goes back to Henley and re-enters the Commons in a year's time?
I don't see how that happens because it's not the good burghers of Henley who decide that, but central office. And this is a thumbing your nose really at the party. And the way the party had no warning of that, I don't see how Johnson can fight the next election as a Tory MP.
And what are the implications for his career, do you think? Is it, at this stage, the end of Boris Johnson as a frontline political figure, Christopher?
I don't think it is. It's the beginning of a new era of a different Boris Johnson, one who's freer to talk, free to say what he thinks, who may feel the kind of stabilisers are off again, and he can start trying to say what he thinks and see what happens next. I think he likes to a degree, he likes a chaotic tension about what happens next and keeping everyone guessing. That starts again now. I think he's now can shake off the shackles of this Privileges Committee and what it might have done to him. He's not very cleverable. He doesn't know many Tory MPs, and that's part of the problem of why he was quite a loner. And I think he chose quite badly with some of the advisors he's had advising him in recent years. He's got a chance here to reset what Johnson is. Some of them have been saying he might try and go for a seat in the north of England. I just don't think the current leadership would want to bring him back into the party because of what he's done tonight. This is not expected. There was no notice for the Whip's office. They had no warning of this. They had about a minute's warning of Nadine Dorries going around 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock. There was no notice about Johnson resigning, and that will rankle because it's thrown the party into more chaos. The one thing it does do, though, is remind everyone of the chaos of last year, of Johnson's difficulties as Prime Minister, controlling his own backbenchers, controlling his own party and his own staff and their behaviour. It allows Rishi Sunak to paint himself correctly as a calming influence, and that will only do I think, support him in the short term. But whether that's enough to win the red wall seats, the key seats he's got to win back or hold on to win the next election is yet to be decided.
Well, Christopher Hope, your WhatsApp is about to explode. I'll let you get back to it. Can't wait to read tomorrow's Telegraph. My thanks to the Telegraph's Christopher Hope. Of course, he will soon be the GB News political editor. Let's get reaction now from my top pundits tonight. Author and presenter Emma Wolf, broadcaster and GB News star Albi Amankona, and writer and historian David Oldroyd-Bolt. Let me come to you first, Albi, as you are a Conservative supporter, a member of the Conservative Party. Your reaction to this bombshell development?
I think it's pretty shocking news. Certainly no one was expecting this morning. First Nadine Dorries, now Boris Johnson. But I do think that if anyone thinks that Rishi Sunak is anything other than thrilled that Boris Johnson is standing down as an MP, that they would be wrong. Now, Rishi Sunak has no competition on the backbenches anymore, no focal point for dissenters. Rishi Sunak is essentially untouchable until after the next general election. So I think the team at number 10 might be quietly quite pleased that this Boris charade seems like it's over.
Emma Wolf, is Boris Johnson more of a threat to Rishi Sunak in the Commons or outside of it?
I don't think this news is that surprising, really. Boris Johnson is not a man who likes to be told that he's in the wrong. He's like a schoolboy. He absolutely, clearly, he's very angered by the findings of this report, which we haven't seen yet. And also, he's been off making a lot of money, as Harry Mount said. He's been trousering a lot of cash. And why would he want to be told he's in the wrong without a comeback? He's angry, and I'm interested to see what happens over the next year.
Once again, David Oldroyd-Bolt, Boris Johnson makes the headlines.
He's got the most extraordinary ability to make it all about himself, hasn't he? I think anybody thinking that this is the end of Boris in politics is absolutely mistaken. After the nuclear attack, the only things left will be cockroaches, sea urchins and Boris Johnson's political ambitions. It's extraordinary, the ability of the man, this sort of, what would you call it, a Teflon-like ability to wipe away scandal from his record that other people would have been brought down by. But I do think that for the moment he is no threat at all to Rishi Sunak. I agree with both of my fellow panellists that this is him done for a while. And besides which, I'm not sure he's terrible. Though there is anger in the statement, that's because, as Emma says, he really dislikes being told off. It's a fit of pique, it's not righteous anger. But I think he'll also be quite happy about the fact that he can now go off and earn as much money as he wants without having to declare it in the register of members' interests.
Well, I'm delighted that I've got a set of pundits of such high calibre tonight, because if you're just joining us, we have the bombshell political news that Boris Johnson has resigned his seat in the House of Commons. There will be a by-election which the Tories will likely lose. What next for Boris? What next for Rishi Sunak? And what next for the result of the 2024 general election? All of that to come.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Well, I'm hearing from insiders, if you're joining us, in relation to the departure of Boris Johnson from the House of Commons, that there's talk of other Tory MPs standing down immediately, provoking a potential flurry of by-elections. So if you're just joining us, the bombshell news. Boris Johnson has resigned his seat of Uxbridge and Ruislip. It's a marginal constituency. It's a by-election Rishi Sunak will most likely lose. It will happen in just a few weeks' time. It's the last thing Sunak needs. What are the implications for the government, for the outcome of the next election and Johnson's future? What's his plan? Will he be accepted as the prospective parliamentary candidate for his old constituency of Henley? No, says top journalistic insider Christopher Hope. Your reaction, please, mark at gbnews.com. Is Boris Johnson the victim of a Remainer coup, an establishment coup? And also this talk of another party. Would you vote for a breakaway party led by Boris Johnson with the likes of Nadine Dorries as his lieutenant? It's an astonishing thought, but all bets are off when it comes to Boris Johnson. Let me bring you details of his statement. Let me tell you, he might be a free man, but he's an angry man too. So Johnson announces he stands down as an MP with immediate effect. He has said he received a letter from the committee which is investigating whether he lied to MPs over Partygate, making it clear, he says, much to my amazement, that they are determined to use the proceedings against me to drive me out of Parliament. That reading between the lines there, it seems that Boris Johnson has jumped before he has been pushed. As a result of this action by the Privileges Committee, Johnson says, I've written to my association in Uxbridge and South Ruislip to say that I'm stepping down forthwith and triggering an immediate by-election. Let's now get the views of Andrew R.T. Davies, who joins us down the line. Mr. Davies, thank you very much for joining us. Let me just bring you a little bit more on what Boris Johnson had to say. I'm very sorry to leave my wonderful constituency. It's been a huge honour to serve them, both as mayor and MP. He's also said that it's like a kangaroo court, and he is not happy. He said the committee has still not produced a shred of evidence that I knowingly or recklessly misled the Commons. So he is angry. They know perfectly well, says Johnson, in what almost becomes a rant, that when I spoke in the Commons, I was saying what I believed sincerely to be true and what I'd been briefed to say, like any other minister. Well, he is not like any other minister. He is Boris Johnson. What of his future? Is there a plan? Let's get the views of Andrew R.T. Davies now. Thank you for joining us. Your reaction to this bombshell news.
Well, good evening, Mark. I've only just heard the news, obviously, as I've come through the door tonight. It is obviously a challenging picture, to say the least. I've had a great opportunity and privilege to campaign with Boris Johnson on many occasions, and he has huge empathy with people who are voters at general election times and the mayor's election in London, and when he's been a constituency MP. And by his results, he's shown that he can empathise and connect to people. But it is a fact that sadly things came apart last year, and obviously he had to stand down as Prime Minister. And I regret, obviously, the situation we find ourselves in at the moment. But what we've got to be doing as politicians and as a party is getting on with the day job of focusing on what people's priorities are. And that's dealing with the waiting lists in the NHS, making sure the economy is robust and creating quality jobs, and dealing with what people want politicians to do, which is get on with the job that they're elected to do.
Yes, of course, you are the leader of the Welsh Conservatives. Do you think that Boris Johnson is the victim of an establishment coup?
Well, obviously, the report hasn't been published yet, so I haven't had a chance to see that report. As I understand it, Boris had the report delivered to him yesterday, and he would have had time to digest that report. He's taken the decision tonight, obviously, to stand down as an MP. I think there are concerns from some quarters of the political establishment about how this has been conducted, because Boris Johnson won a mandate in 2019 to be the Prime Minister of this country. But we have a Prime Minister in Rishi Sunak who's getting on with the day job, who delivers for people across the whole of the country, who's just come back from America today and is importantly delivering on the 5 priorities that he's set the government to do leading up to the next general election. But it is a fact that Boris does feel that there's a conspiracy against him.
Andrew, you are a seasoned political operator and campaigner. Is this the end of Boris Johnson's political career?
I don't think you could ever underestimate Boris Johnson. I mean, as I said, I haven't seen the report that's been prepared by the Parliamentary Standards Committee in Westminster. Obviously, that will become public in not too distant future. But from my experience of working with Boris Johnson, I know how much empathy he has with voters, how he can connect to voters, such as being the Mayor of London, or being a constituency MP, or indeed winning a mandate from the people in 2019 to be the Prime Minister. At every opportunity, he's been a success story at the ballot box, but it is a fact that regrettably things did go wrong last year, and obviously he had to stand down as Prime Minister. We have a Prime Minister in Rishi Sunak who's getting on with the job of delivering for this country. As I said earlier in my contribution, just arriving back from America this week, been in Moldova before that, standing shoulder to shoulder with President Zelensky in Ukraine, and obviously making sure the economy continues to grow and create quality jobs. And that's what the British people want politicians to do, is deliver for them and their priorities.
Is your perception that the actions of the Privileges Committee into Boris Johnson's comments in relation to Partygate were politically motivated? Does this look like a stitch-up?
Well, as I said, I haven't seen the report, so I can't offer a view on that.
No, but he's leaving. I mean, Andrew, he's leaving the House of Commons. Clearly, it's a damning verdict, which Boris, in his statement, says is undemocratic. He's described them as a kangaroo court.
And obviously, he would have far greater understanding of what the report might say. He obviously spent for the committee as well, so he understands how the committee has worked. I think there has been obviously observations passed about the impartiality of the chair, Harriet Harman, through comments that she made prior to becoming the chair of that committee. But there are other parliamentarians on that committee, and so when the report is published, we'll be able to digest it. But
Andrew,
I do think that... Yes, Mark?
Sorry to interrupt you. A fascinating quote from the ex-Prime Minister in his statement. When I left office last year, the government was only a handful of points behind in the polls. That gap has now massively widened. Do you think he wishes ill will on Rishi Sunak? Do you think he's hoping now for the Tories to lose the next election so he can gain the moral high ground?
Boris Johnson is a Conservative and he wants what's best for the Conservative Party. We have a Prime Minister in Rishi Sunak who's getting on with delivering on the 5 priorities that he's identified: paying down the debt, reducing inflation, growing the economy, cutting waiting lists and stopping the small boats. Those are the priorities the government is charged with doing. Sadly, Boris won't be in the House of Commons to support the government in doing that, but I know that Boris Johnson, having been with him on several campaign trails, is a Conservative at heart, and he'll want what's best for this country, and what is best for this country is to have a Conservative Prime Minister with a Conservative Party having a majority in Parliament to deliver on the people's priorities.
Andrew R.T. Davies, thank you so much for joining us, rocking a lovely tan there, no doubt achieved from the Cardiff sunshine. We'll catch up again soon. Let's get further reaction if you're just joining us on GB News or GB News Radio on DAB+. A sensational story, one of the big political stories of the year so far. Boris Johnson to step down with immediate effect as the Member of Parliament for Uxbridge and South Ruislip. Let's get reaction now from another top Tory insider, former advisor to ex-Prime Minister David Cameron, Philip Blond. Mr. Blond, thank you for joining us on Mark Dolan tonight. Does Boris Johnson have a plan up his sleeve?
Well, one suspects so. I mean, I can't imagine he would want to leave the stage entirely. I think the analysis that he will have made is that he would not have survived any recall petition. He would not have survived any vote in Parliament. He would not have survived any by-election in his current constituency. So he can resign now, maintain his political capital and possibly re-enter the fray if the Conservative Party is beaten at the next election. And if indeed, as you reported, we already know there are two by-elections, if Nadine Dorris's seat is lost, then that would, I think, spell real problems or issues for the current Prime Minister. It would be hard to see how he could continue to maintain the confidence of the parliamentary party. And if, as you mentioned earlier, Mark, others are saying they're threatening to stand down, then we could sort of have a coup d'etat in reverse. The number of by-elections will then promote another leadership election. And then could Boris Johnson run in some manner? Well, it would occur to him, I think, to do so. So yeah, I don't think we've seen the last of him. It's hard to think how he could return, but we live in a time of crisis, and the government is likely to be in crisis.
The Conservatives have a good working majority, Philip, courtesy of Boris Johnson's 2019 landslide victory. But with enough defections, enough resignations, is it conceivable that a sufficient number of pro-Boris Tory MPs could bring down this administration before Christmas?
Well, I don't think they'll bring down the Tory government, but they might wish to bring down the leadership. I mean, there's no love lost in the Conservative Party between the present Prime Minister and Boris Johnson supporters. They view Sunak's resignation as the knife in the back. So I think, but they don't. If Johnson is out of Parliament, I find it very difficult to see how he could get back in. The government always has kind of behind the scenes means of blocking MPs' appointments. You know, the idea that the constituency party can decide is for the birds, really. They're given a pre-selected list. So I don't see how he's back in. But if Sunak does stand down, then, you know, where does Johnson's support go? You know, who would command the support of most MPs in the Conservative Party? It's not immediately clear. And we would have the Conservative Party casting around for an election winner because they would have decided that they don't have anybody who can win in the present Prime Minister. And conceivably, that's the situation that could be brought about if more than two by-elections take place. I wonder if there's any further confirmation on that. But even the loss of the second of Nadine Dorris's seat would be enough, given her majority, to provoke serious questions.
Well, you're absolutely right, because if the Tories lose Nadine Dorris's Bedfordshire seat, well, that's 24,000 majority. If they lose that, surely that poses an existential threat to the Prime Minister. Philip Blond, thank you so much for joining us, former advisor to ex-Prime Minister David Cameron. After the break, we've pulled out all the stops. We're going to be speaking to former Tory MP and now a significant figure over on the other side of the pond in the United States, Louise Mensch. Also, ex-Tory Government Minister Anne Widdecombe and former Tory MP Neil Hamilton. We'll hear from all of them next.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome to a Mark Dolan Tonight Tories in Turmoil special, with the developing story that Boris Johnson has sensationally resigned as a Conservative MP. He'll be leaving the Commons in a matter of weeks, sparking a by-election in Uxbridge and Ruislip, a by-election that, let's be honest, Rishi Sunak can't win. Time for one email before three major guests on this story. And it's from Richard. Hi, Mark. Boris has just fired the starting pistol on a very clever plan to bring down Sunak. There you go. Now, let's speak to former Conservative MP, now a very influential figure in the United States, Louise Mensch. Louise, your reaction to this bombshell development?
It is a bombshell. I think most people were not expecting the Standards and Privileges Committee to go this far. And I think Boris has really got a good point when he says that this is undemocratic. There's nothing new here. There can't be anything new here because he gave evidence in public. We've all heard what he's got to say. And this sanction is frankly outrageous. The fact that Harriet Harman leads the committee is a bad thing. But I think Boris is playing it right. He knew that he couldn't get past this report, so he resigned immediately. And in terms of does he want to knife Sunak in the back, I would say not so much right now, because, of course, he cannot be leader of the Conservative Party again until he becomes an MP again. So if we think about that, the ideal time for Boris to try and retake over the Conservative Party is after a disastrous loss that many of us, even Conservatives who want Sunak to win, anticipate will happen at the next election.
Yes, you're speaking to us live from the United States, and you'll be aware that legal action against Donald Trump has made him more popular with his base. Do you think the same thing could happen to Boris now? Has the Privileges Committee made him a political martyr?
Well, I think, honestly, there's not much of a comparison. I can see how it's superficially attractive to compare the two. But Donald Trump has been indicted in a legal process. He's been prosecuted, the indictment is public, everybody can read it, there was a grand jury. The Standards and Privileges Committee is just a parliamentary boondoggle who've taken it on themselves to yank a former Prime Minister out of a safe seat on the basis of nothing legal whatsoever. So I honestly do not think that the two things compare. Now, will it make Boris Johnson more popular? That is quite possible, because I think even those of the Conservative supporters who don't like Boris would have to say that this is way too much. This is over the top, and I think it will gain him a lot of sympathy.
Louise Mensch, thank you so much for joining us. Former Conservative MP, a broadcaster and political commentator live from the United States. A strong and angry email from Helen, who says, Mark, I am a staunch supporter of Boris Johnson. I'm incandescent at this news. The Tory party is no more, and Sunak and his band of Remainers are responsible. Sunak is a snake and is not my leader and has not been elected as PM, and I will not vote Tory whilst he is in the driving seat. This whole affair, says Helen, stinks. And if Labour win the next election, the Tories deserve everything they get. This is war, says Helen. Keep those emails coming. mark@gbnews.com. Let's now speak to a very good friend of the show, the highly respected former government minister and best-selling author, Anne Widdecombe. And does this stink to you?
Yes, but it always has. It had from the moment that Harriet Harman was put in charge of that committee. She'd already said in public that she believed that Boris had broken the rules. So she came with a fixed opinion. So yes, it does. I think the Conservatives would be very stupid indeed if they tried to get rid of yet another Prime Minister at this stage. I think they've now just got to stick with Rishi. They will lose the next general election. They will probably lose very badly Nadine Dorris's seat, which has got a huge Tory majority. And if they do that, then I think their fate is sealed. You know, I have my head in my hands sometimes. This is a party that came in under Boris's leadership with a majority of 80. It's a party that began that parliament by actually winning by-elections, the government winning by-elections. Now look where they are. Just look where they are.
Now, Anne, what of this talk of Boris Johnson leading a breakaway centre-right party, possibly in partnership with a party that you're supporting, Reform UK?
Well, there is already not a breakaway, there is already a right of centre party, and yes, it's called Reform UK. And yes, it's not polling too badly at the moment. So I'm sure that would be considered. But the fact is that Boris, who promised to get Brexit done, did not give us Brexit, and he did betray Northern Ireland. So there is quite a lot there to get over. And I don't think people should be too excited now. You know, is Boris going to come back? Is he going to stand in a by-election? Is he going to do this, that and the other thing? I think we would be much better advised to approach this quite calmly and to see what eventuates, particularly at those by-elections.
Indeed. Now, Anne, I think we can all agree you write Boris Johnson off at your peril, although it would look like his future within the Conservative Party is not looking wildly hopeful, is it? Do you not think he's burned so many bridges with those backbenchers that any hope that if he won in a seat, an alternative seat like Henley at the next election, that they'd welcome him back as leader with open arms? That's not going to happen, is it?
Well, I think he would be a very, very controversial choice. I think he knows that. But the fact is, this is a man who won a general election with an 80-seat majority. If Rishi Sunak goes on to lose a general election, probably losing even more seats than that, and gets a derisory result, then I think the party and the country will say, hang on, who delivers for us? Who delivers? But, you know, that's up to them.
And Widdecombe, can I, apologies for interrupting you. You interrupt Anne Widdecombe at your peril as well. Anne, does this strike you as potentially an establishment coup, or even, dare I say it, a Remainer coup?
Oh, I think the Remainers have a tremendous hand in the whole anti-Boris scenario right from the start. Right from the start, they were furious that Boris won on that promise, which he did not fulfil, which was to get Brexit done. What he got done was not a Brexit at all, and as I say, it betrayed Northern Ireland. But the Remainers have always hated him for that. And yes, I mean, I think that, their hands are in this. Their hands are on the tiller, but they're driving the ship towards the rocks. They don't realise it.
What about Boris Johnson's motivation now that he's out of the Commons? He's going to make a few quid, isn't he? He's going to have a newspaper column, I would have thought. He'll finish all the book contracts that he's signed up for. Perhaps he'll become a GB News presenter. Let me put it on record that Boris Johnson can come to this channel and host a show. I've been receiving texts from the boss, and this is not a drill. That's right. We are... breaking news, offering Boris Johnson a show on GB News. He's got the time, and of course he's got the talent. He's not as good as Nigel Farage, but we'll train him up. So, Anne Widdecombe, what do you anticipate Boris Johnson, notwithstanding that kind offer from GB News, will do next?
I think you probably summed it up. He's got books to finish. He's got contracts, literary contracts to fulfil. He'll almost certainly get a newspaper column. I imagine he'd get one just for the asking. And he will concentrate on making money. And maybe at some stage he will want to come back. He's not a man who gives up that easily. Maybe he will want to come back. But for the time being, he and the party that he once led are in the most almighty mess. They are a laughingstock. The party I served for 55 years is a laughingstock.
Anne, can I just put a spanner in the works here and ask a slightly balancing question? Isn't this rather petulant behaviour from Boris Johnson? Isn't he one big crybaby? After all, he's brought a lot of this political scandal on himself, particularly the chaotic scenes at Number 10 during the pandemic.
Well, you could say that he's brought some of it on himself, but I think an awful lot of the campaign against him has been pretty malicious. I don't think he's a crybaby. I think his honours list is saying, "Yah, boo," to the party. And then he's saying, "Oh, by the way, I'm off, and you don't know what I'm going to do next." And I don't think that is an act of petulance. I think that's an act of a man who knows that he's got no immediate future in the party. So he's going to go off and do something else, but reserve his position. I don't see anything wrong with that. The fact is, most prime ministers, when they're ousted, crawl away. I think he will take a very different approach.
Anne Widdecombe is the star of Mark Dolan tonight every Sunday. And Anne, we look forward to seeing you in 2 days' time when we've had a chance to reflect on this astonishing political development. My thanks to Anne Widdecombe. If you're just joining us, Boris Johnson has sensationally stepped down as the Member of Parliament for South Ruislip, of course, and Uxbridge and South Ruislip. That's a marginal seat. I'm going to call it that the Tories will lose that by-election in a matter of weeks, a major headache for the PM. What if the Tories lose the Nadine Dorries by-election as well? Because, of course, Boris Johnson, Nadine Dorries has a Bedfordshire constituency with a majority of 24,000. So if Rishi Sunak loses that majority, is his position under pressure? Let's get reaction now from ex-Tory MP and the leader of UKIP, no less, Neil Hamilton. Mr. Hamilton, your reaction to the news?
Well, as I've said before, Boris is a bull who carries his own china shop around with him. Whatever he does is accompanied by the sound of smashing crockery and broken glass. He's a big figure in a small political pond that the House of Commons has now become. Rishi Sunak has no personality at all compared with Boris Johnson, and he's got all the personality of a milk pudding, which I suppose is better, at least, than Keir Starmer, who's a suet pudding, but there isn't that much to divide them. I think that Boris here has just anticipated events. I think he is going to be condemned by the Privileges Committee, which is, I think, a kangaroo court. And I think that Uxbridge would be lost anyway in a year's time in the coming general election. So I think he's making the best of a bad job here and bailing out before he's kicked out so that he can say that the defeat in 12, 15 months' time is nothing to do with me. Although, of course, it is, because he set the scene for it during his years as Prime Minister, as Anne Widdecombe has just described. He didn't deliver on Brexit. He's done nothing about mass migration. in the last 13 years under this Conservative government. He has doubled down on all the green nonsense, which is adding so much to people's energy bills and has endangered Britain's energy security, and so much else, which are at the bottom of the government's current political problems. So although he's a big political figure, I don't see Boris ultimately as the saviour of the Conservative Party, because he's played a massive hand himself in causing the current catastrophe.
Neil, you know the inner workings of the Tory party very well. What do you think are the implications of Boris Johnson's departure for party unity? Is this now a party in the throes of a civil war?
Well, it jolly well should be, because most of the Conservative Party in Parliament seem to me to be Social Democrats. This is, of course, what David Cameron and George Osborne deliberately set out to do, because they introduced controls on the candidate selection process to introduce all these kind of people into Parliament and to block people like Anne Widdecombe and myself, for that matter, from getting selected in the first place and then getting elected. So the Conservative Party is the author of its own misfortune. And it's a tragedy because, as Anne said, they were elected with a majority of 80, first of all to deliver on Brexit, which they've not done, and on so much else besides. What the government has been doing has been fundamentally anti-conservative. We've got Michael Gove at the minute, as the so-called levelling up secretary, actively trying to destroy the market in private rented accommodation by getting rid of the short-hold tenancies, which Margaret Thatcher introduced nearly 40 years ago, and which revived the private rented market after decades of rent control. A fundamentally anti-conservative measure, which is going to exacerbate the housing crisis and is going to be worst of all for the people on low incomes who can't afford to buy their own property, will have to rent. There'll be less rented accommodation available. That's just one example amongst millions which I could cite to show how this Conservative Party has betrayed its own heritage and betrayed the interests of its members. So, the coming cataclysm is a great opportunity for cleansing. And whether Boris is part of the cleansing process remains to be seen, because I don't believe that Boris has really got any long-term plan here. He's not a planner by nature. Sunak is a conformist, a calculator who will think ahead. He won't necessarily come to the right conclusions. In fact, he hasn't come to the right conclusions on very much in politics. But Boris doesn't really think very deeply about things. He's a creature of instinct, and he acts in a volatile and unpredictable way. And I've always regarded him more as an entertainer than a politician. In order to decide whether he was pro or anti-Brexit, he tossed a coin effectively. So that really says all you need to know.
Absolutely. Many people do think of Boris as a tosser. Can I ask you, finally, you're the leader of UKIP, which is a major political brand in this country. Richard Tice is the leader of Reform UK. A top and highly respected political insider has texted me on WhatsApp this evening, and they say, I've been sent this. Nadine Dorries resigned earlier. Talk of other Tory MPs standing down immediately or in the coming days. Rumours Boris is going to launch his own party in the near future. Can you put it on record? Would you, as leader of UKIP, go into a political coalition with a breakaway centre-right party led by Boris Johnson?
Well, it would depend on what their political programme was. I mean, Boris, for example, has a record of wanting to give an amnesty for all illegal immigrants, something he said when he was mayor of London, and has never shown any interest in immigration control, which is now one of our biggest political problems. As Prime Minister, he was the one who imposed all these disastrous COVID lockdowns, which wrecked the public finances and have now produced the highest tax burden in 70 years. We certainly wouldn't want to be part and parcel of anything which was associated with that. And we do need to have a united front of those who are on the right against the Conservative Party's betrayal of its own as well as the nation's interests in the last 13 years. And it's a great shame that there are so many splinter parties who, for one reason or another, won't come together. It's something which I've been trying to achieve in the last 12 months. We do need to have a party, and it certainly isn't the Liberal Democrats, who would be even worse than the current government, and the Labour Party, which also would be worse than the current government. What we need is a party which is going to represent the interests of ordinary people, which is what UKIP very successfully did in getting the referendum on Brexit, and on so much else where we pushed the Conservative Party in the right direction. But after the referendum, of course, they've all gone in the opposite direction.
Well, Neil Hamilton, former top government minister, ex-Tory MP, and now the leader of UKIP, thank you so much for joining us, for your instant hot-off-the-press reaction. Let's get reaction now from my top pundits, very briefly if you can, just a few seconds before the news, and we've already booked Edwina Currie and a range of other top political guests for the next hour. We've got rid of the Take at 10 because the running order, here's the running order, and that's what we've done with it. What we have to do is get the views now of my pundits, and I'm delighted to say that with me are Emma Wolfe, Albi Amankona, and, of course, David Oldroyd-Bolt. Emma, what are the implications of today's breaking news for the outcome of the next general election?
Can I just say, I love a Boris Johnson resignation statement. I was just thinking about his resignation last summer. No, I'll talk about what I want to talk about. Forget your question. I was thinking about his resignation last summer, and I was up at silly o'clock doing something at 4 in the morning on telly. It was very moving. Do you remember? Of course. When the herd moves, it moves. He is so 10, 20 times more eloquent than any serving politician.
He's very good at resigning.
He's beautiful. His oratory. I want politicians like that. He's not really a politician. He is an entertainer. But the oratory.
The oratory. Albi, does this essentially, does it sign a death knell for the Tories at the next election?
No, I don't think this is going to have any impact on the next election whatsoever. I think what will have an impact on the next election is whether or not Rishi Sunak is able to deliver on his 5 pledges. And I think one of the things that we forget when we talk about Boris Johnson is that when he stood down, he was very, very unpopular with the public and indeed with the Conservative Party. So I don't think this is going to have an impact.
All right,
on the next
now
election.
I'm going to get a yes or no from David Oldroyd-Bolt. Is this bad news for the Tories? Do they lose the next election off the back of this?
Yes, they do, but they were going to do that anyway.
OK, listen, more from my top pundits very shortly. It's a Tories in Turmoil special. More to come in just 2 minutes' time.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome to a Mark Dolan Tonight, Tories in Turmoil special. If you're just joining us, Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland, is stepping down as an MP. He's stepping down as the Uxbridge and South Ruislip MP. That's a marginal constituency. That will provoke a by-election in a matter of weeks, a by-election that Rishi Sunak will surely lose, piling more pressure on a beleaguered Prime Minister who had to deal with the news earlier today that Nadine Dorries, the former Culture Secretary, was also stepping down, provoking a by-election in Bedfordshire with a safe majority of 24,000, but not safe under the current circumstances. So what now for Boris Johnson? What will he do in the coming months? Will he be a thorn in the side, a help or a hindrance to the Prime Minister? Is his political career over? And is this an establishment coup? Is it a right royal stitch-up? All of these questions to be answered from across the political spectrum. Top journalists, top pundits, you won't want to go anywhere. First, the headlines with Ray Addison in the newsroom.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story tonight. Boris Johnson has resigned as an MP with immediate effect, accusing a Commons investigation into whether he misled Parliament over Partygate of trying to drive him out. Maintaining his position that he did not lie to the Commons, Mr Johnson accused the committee of making deeply prejudicial remarks about his guilt before they had seen the evidence. He also claimed that they should have recused themselves. Mr Johnson used his resignation statement to take aim at Rishi Sunak's government, saying, "When I left office last year, the government was only a handful of points behind in the polls. That gap has now massively widened." His resignation will trigger a by-election in his constituency of Uxbridge and South Ruislip and comes just hours after the resignation of former Minister Nadine Dorries. Shadow Attorney General Emily Thornberry says it's the latest example of turmoil in the Conservative Party.
I think that Boris Johnson has brought all this on himself. But, you know, it's a soap opera. What the public want to know about is who is going to look after their interests, who's going to be actually interested in the cost of living, in looking after our hospitals, in making sure that we fight crime on our streets. That's what should be important, not all this nonsense, not all this chaos, and not all this corruption.
That's the view there from the Labour Party. Politicians from all political parties have been reacting to that shock resignation. MP Michael Fabricant, who was handed a knighthood by the former Prime Minister, described his treatment as disgraceful. The SNP's Deputy Westminster leader, Mhairi Black, said Mr Johnson jumped before he was pushed. And Deputy Lib Dem leader Daisy Cooper has issued a statement which simply reads, "Good riddance." Well, members of the public have also been reacting to Boris Johnson's resignation. Here's what people in London had to say.
I think it's quite surprising that he has. I wasn't expecting it. But with everything that's happened over the past 2 to 3 years, I think it's kind of the push comes to shove. He's gone. He had no choice to leave.
I've got to say probably that it's for the best. During the pandemic, he sort of stiffed the country over and has not been held accountable for it.
Boris Johnson's statement comes just hours after the publication of his resignation honours list, which included close allies of the former Prime Minister. Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary, receives a damehood. Former Business Secretary and GB News presenter Jacob Rees-Mogg receives a knighthood. Sean Bailey, a London Assembly member and former mayoral candidate, has been handed a peerage and he'll now sit in the House of Lords. And in other news, the US Justice Department has unsealed details of the 37 criminal charges that now face former US President Donald Trump over his handling of classified information. They include keeping sensitive military and nuclear documents and conspiracy to obstruct justice. If found guilty, he could face up to 20 years in prison. It's the second time that Donald Trump has been indicted, but he's the first former president to face criminal charges on a federal level. Mr. Trump is accusing the government of election interference in his campaign to return to the White House in 2024. OK, those are the latest headlines. You can follow us on TV, online, on DAB+ radio and on TuneIn too. This is, of course, GB News. Now let's get back to Mark Dolan.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan tonight, a Tories in turmoil special. If you're just joining us, the bombshell news that Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of this country, is stepping down with immediate effect as an MP. The MP for Uxbridge and South Ruislip, a marginal seat. Poor old Rishi Sunak's going to almost certainly lose that by-election in a matter of weeks. He's also got the by-election of Nadine Dorries in Bedfordshire. That's a safe seat, 24,000. But is it safe under the current circumstances? Of course, we'll get a reaction on that. Let me fill you in on what we know so far. Mr. Johnson is stepping down as an MP with immediate effect after receiving the Partygate report. He has accused the Commons investigation into whether he misled Parliament as trying to drive him out. His resignation will trigger a by-election in the coming weeks. In a long, dramatic resignation statement, he says he's bewildered and appalled that he can be forced out in such a manner. He described it as undemocratic. He said it's very sad to be leaving Parliament, at least for now, hinting there that he has future political ambitions. So did he jump before he was pushed? What are the implications for the outcome of the next general election? Some notable responses already coming into my WhatsApp. This from Brendan Clark-Smith, of course, Redwall Tory MP, who has said, tonight we saw the end result of a parliamentary witch hunt, which would put a banana republic to shame. Clark-Smith goes on, if you thought we'd seen the back of the Tory civil war, tonight may have reopened that can of worms. Let's get reaction now from our erstwhile and supremely well-connected deputy political editor, Tom Harwood. And Tom Harwood, is this now a party in the full throes of a civil war?
Well, Mark, it would seem like it. I've been talking to members of Parliament this evening who've been revealing to me back and forths on WhatsApp groups, these famous nexuses of political communications. And I can reveal that in the backbench Conservative MP WhatsApp group, both Nadine Dorries and Boris Johnson have now been booted out by Gary Sambrook, a backbench MP who won his seat in 2019 and runs or is one of the admins of this particular famous MP WhatsApp group. It's a fairly extraordinary thing to see the man who won that 2019 general election with a higher share of the vote than Tony Blair won in 1997. Indeed, the highest share of the vote that any political party had won since the 1970s, and the most number of seats that the Tories had won since the days of Margaret Thatcher. To see that man within the space of 3.5 years, not only leave the Prime Ministership, leave number 10, leave Parliament, but also to leave a WhatsApp group. I mean, my gosh. It really boggles the mind. But it is extraordinary to think about how we got here. Because ultimately there was, of course, a police investigation. This is a parliamentary investigation, separate to whether Boris Johnson did anything wrong. Of course, he was found to have on one occasion broken rules in June 2020. That was for that rather miserable-looking event, standing round the cabinet table, which occurred for around 15 minutes, in the words of Boris Johnson. We're seeing on our screens now, for those watching on television, one of the events that Boris Johnson was not found to have broken the rules at, whereas this one, with the cabinet room table and a meagre-looking party he was found to have broken the rules at. Some of these photos have been conflated and confused in what the Metropolitan Police found to be events that were simply passing by working staffers. But one of these events, the one with orange juice on the table, was found to be the one that broke the rules. Of course, this parliamentary investigation, this was about whether or not Boris Johnson lied to the House. This was about what he said at the dispatch box, not what he did in Number 10. And it's fairly extraordinary that the terms of this investigation have been so much more broad and the threshold for wrongdoing of this investigation so much lowered than any comparable investigation in recent history. Instead of proving that Boris Johnson knowingly misled Parliament, that's the normal bar that would have to be met for one of these investigations. It was invented a new bar, whether or not he recklessly misled Parliament. And for that, Boris Johnson clearly feels rather aggrieved.
Indeed. Listen, Tom Harwood, thank you so much for your on-the-spot reaction. Of course, I know that your phone will be ringing hot right now. What about those pictures of the WhatsApp group? This is the official Tory WhatsApp group. Let me tell you that these pictures are exclusive to GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. That's right, we have exclusive images of this WhatsApp group. If you're of my parents' generation, let me tell you, WhatsApp group is basically messages on your phone, and it's a collection of individuals in a group. This would be the Parliamentary Conservative Party. And Boris Johnson, a man that delivered such a victory in 2019, dumped out of the group, as well as Nadine Dorries, the former Culture, Media and Sports Secretary as well. A party in the grip of a civil war, it looks like. Let's get reaction now to somebody that knows the party well and served it with distinction as a leading government minister. She became a broadcaster and best-selling author after that, Edwina Currie. Edwina, what a right royal mess.
Isn't it just, Mark? Do you know, I thought you'd have me on GB News tonight to talk about 40 years ago when I was first elected to Parliament, when we had a majority of 144, and it was the most glorious victory and fabulous night. And I tell you what, Margaret Thatcher would never have behaved as Boris Johnson has been behaving. Her standards were much higher. Her integrity was off the scale. And I'm afraid that she would have looked down her nose at what her successor has been up to today. I think it's an absolute disgrace. He should be ashamed of himself. He really should. That said, he's an entertainer. He's a member of a party of one. He doesn't care how much damage his wrecking ball does. He has an awful lot in common, I'm afraid, with President Trump in America, who doesn't care how much damage to his party his activities give, as long as he can in some way have revenge on those who criticize him. Now, you know, the whole thing, I'm afraid, is a tragedy. Boris has extraordinary abilities, Mark. I'm sure most people listening would agree with this. He has extraordinary abilities. He is a real personality, real character, hugely gifted when it comes to using words. The one thing he lacks is any kind of moral sense, any sense of duty, any sense of loyalty. When he's Prime Minister, by golly, expected loyalty from everybody else, but he doesn't give it, does he? And I think that is such a tragedy and such a shame. It does make Rishi Sunak's life a lot harder, but in the end, your commentator who said that that Rishi will get elected again, the Tories will get elected again, as long as they deliver on what people really need and what they really want, I think that's correct.
And is Boris Johnson more of a threat to Rishi Sunak outside of the Commons than in it?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. In the Commons, he was always going to be, you know, another possibility for coming back into office. And that's always a permanent threat. But outside the House of Commons, to get back in, he'd have to persuade a third constituency after Henley and Uxbridge that he was going to serve them truly, hand on heart, and never leave them and do everything they want. And maybe third time they would actually realise they'd see through him. You know, selection committees are not stupid people. And they would say to him, yeah, well, you know, your record suggests exactly the opposite of what you are saying, Mr. Johnson. And meanwhile, actually, you can't afford to be an MP any longer. You can earn an enormous amount of money as a media personality and making speeches all around the world, especially in America. And you really have to toe the line rather more when you get to the House of Commons. So my suspicion is, and bear in mind as well, Mark, you were talking about your elderly parents earlier, who I think are probably younger than me. But bear in mind that Boris next year will be 60. That's getting on a bit if you are trying to get back into Parliament. No, I don't think he's going to be coming back in. And to be honest, I think much of the attack and much of the threat that he poses will fade, because what really matters is power. And power resides in number 10 Downing Street, which Rishi Sunak, I think, is wielding in a totally different fashion, much less histrionics. In fact, I would like him sometimes to produce a little more sparkle. But if he produces the goods as far as the economy is concerned, I think he'll win through.
Don't worry about golden oldies. Edwina, you have the energy and complexion of a teenager.
Well, thank you so much for that. Let's bear in mind the majority of members of the Conservative Party are probably older than I am. And hopefully many of them can remember the golden days when honesty and integrity and decency and really good economic policies, which took a long time to develop and took a long time to implement successfully, were in the hands of our woman Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. And we have a very, very good record to be proud of in the Tory party, and I've no doubt that we'll add to it at the next general election.
Well, let's talk about that, Edwina. Two quick ones before we let you go. First of all, does today's announcement by Boris Johnson that he's leaving the Commons have any implications for the outcome of the next election, first of all?
I'm not sure it does, to be honest, because there's nothing as an ex-MP. I mean, he is very much today's news, as was Nadine Dorries this morning, but look how quickly that faded. Once you've made that jump into the spotlight, the spotlight moves on. And other things and other issues become more important. I mean, frankly, I've spent far more time on Twitter today looking at what's happening in Ukraine, where the fate of the free world really is being decided, whereas Boris Johnson, toddling around in his large shorts, as I can see on the screen at the moment, really is going to be yesterday's news. You know, we used to say you would use them to wrap the chips in, and he's already made himself yesterday's man. He was a very good Prime Minister in many, many ways, as he says himself boastfully in his letter. And if he had behaved himself a little bit better, he might still be Prime Minister, and he might be leading us into the next election and looking forward to victory in exactly the same way as Margaret Thatcher did 40 years ago.
Edwina, thank you so much for joining us in a timely fashion. We'll catch up soon. Former Government Minister, best-selling author and broadcaster Edwina Currie, if you're just joining us. One of the big political stories of the year, a massive political bombshell. Boris Johnson to step down from the House of Commons as an MP with immediate effect. More reaction to come from a top former Tory MP and one of the leading political scribblers on Fleet Street. Plus my pundits, all of that next in a Tories in Turmoil special.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
If you're just joining us, massive political news. A political bombshell has been dropped by none other than Boris Johnson, a man who is, let's be honest, a headline machine. Well, he's stepping down as an MP with immediate effect. He's going to provoke a by-election which the Tories will most likely lose in just a few weeks' time. Briefly, reaction from Labour. Angela Rayner, their deputy leader, has said she's sick to the back teeth of this never-ending Tory soap opera. After 13 years of Conservative chaos, enough is enough. Well, look, let's now get a reaction from the political editor of the excellent Huffington Post online newspaper, Kevin Schofield, and the political commentator, broadcaster and best-selling author, Duncan Larkham. Kevin Schofield, I'll give you an easy question. What happens next?
Well, what happens next is that Boris Johnson exits stage left from the Houses of Parliament. And yeah, I think you're right, Mark. Labour will win that by-election, which is obviously an enormous headache for Rishi Sunak. And not only the Uxbridge by-election, we're also going to have a by-election in Mid-Bedfordshire because obviously Nadine Dorries resigns as an MP earlier on today. And that, at the moment, you would say has to be odds on for the Lib Dems. So yeah, a double headache for Rishi Sunak. It's been a pretty miserable end to the week. He'd had quite a good week really over in Washington. I think his trip to see Joe Biden had gone pretty well for the Prime Minister. But yet again, the Tory civil war has erupted and it's a major headache for Rishi Sunak.
Well, Kevin, absolutely right. And Johnson is a threat to Sunak, but so is Team Boris, and they're angry.
Yeah, they're very angry, not least the MPs who this evening have received honours in Boris Johnson's resignation honours list. They are fuming, quite frankly. I've seen a few WhatsApp messages myself this evening. They are standing by their man being Boris Johnson, and they are really angry, and they are directing that anger towards Rishi Sunak, and that spells major trouble for the Prime Minister going forward.
OK, now we're just getting tomorrow's front pages in, Kevin Schofield, as we speak. I think we might have the Express. There's only one story in town. It is Boris Johnson. We'll start with the Telegraph. We've got the Express. We've got both the Express and the Telegraph, actually. And, of course, they both splash with Bojo. And here we go. Let's take a look at what we've got. It is the Express. And they are pretty Boris supporting, really. They are the Boris Spartans over at the Express. Boris quits Kangaroo Court, forces me out. I think we might have the Telegraph as well. The Telegraph lead with Johnson quits as MP over Partygate. Well, I'll bring you full pundit reaction to that shortly, but let's speak to the political commentator and best-selling author Duncan Larkham. And Duncan, do you anticipate a scorched earth policy on the part of Boris Johnson to Rishi Sunak? Do you think that Johnson will now try to destroy this government, even if it means the Tories lose the next election?
Good evening, Mark. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the problem for Rishi Sunak is that whether you like or loathe Boris Johnson, he is a winner, and he has been incredibly successful to winning huge amounts of votes and becoming Prime Minister. And many people felt that he, yes, was the victim of a witch hunt all along with Partygate. And a politician that's as popular as that might be hanging up his spurs for now, but the question is, what on earth is he going to do next, and how much could that potentially damage this Prime Minister?
Duncan, thank you, gentlemen, for your time. I wish we had longer, but let's now go to a titan of Fleet Street, the iconic former editor of the Sun newspaper, the founder of TalkSport Radio as well, Kelvin McKenzie. And Kelvin, in his statement, and no doubt in the months ahead, Boris Johnson is going to pour the largest bucket of the brown stuff that you can find over the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. He's going to make his life hell.
Yeah, I think it's an absolute disaster for the Conservative Party, which was already, to my mind, and I think to every pollster's mind, going to be destroyed at the next election anyway. This will be another layer of merde poured over their chances. It is a catastrophe. And I would urge Boris, if he was actually looking out for his own interests, as well as the interests of the Conservative Party, actually to stay stum until the other side of the election. Because it doesn't matter what Boris says now, it will make things worse, but it won't make things better. So he would be better off to let the Conservatives get themselves in the most terrible mess, which they will do at the next election anyway, and then afterward come along as the knight in shining armour and say, look, I'm here to help. Actually, he won't even say that when Rishi stands down and the next leader of the Conservative Party takes over. He'll do it as the second one about 2 years or 3 years into what looks disturbingly for your viewers like a 10-year Labour landslide. It's a shocking environment. I have never, ever, nor have you, Mark, and nor has anybody seen such a catastrophe within a major party as that which has happened over the last, couple of years now. Involving Boris, Truss, Rishi, and now Boris again. It is an utter catastrophe. And although I do share the fact that, of course, there are politicians of a completely different hue to Boris who have decided his outcome. They were never going to be helpful. Never going to be helpful. The truth about the matter is he didn't help himself either. So, it's 50-50 in that era. I mean, the truth about the matter is my own mother died during COVID. All we got was 30 minutes at a crematorium and no wake. OK, lots of families have been through this. Therefore, I'm not going to drop a tear over Boris. I'm not. He's going to make £500,000 literally every month for the next 20 years doing brilliant after dinner speeches. We have to live in this country. And I urge him to keep stum between now and the election, right? That's my piece of advice.
Keep stum, says the iconic former editor of the Sun newspaper, Kelvin McKenzie. Kelvin, I know you've got another interview. We'll let you go. We'll catch up again soon. We've got the papers next with full pundit reaction. There's only one story in town. This is Mark Dolan tonight, a Tories in turmoil special.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you're just joining us, let me bring you the massive political development that Boris Johnson is stepping down as an MP with immediate effect. He will provoke a by-election in the Uxbridge and South Ruislip constituency. That's a very, very small majority that he currently enjoys. It will likely be wiped out in a matter of a few weeks' time. Let's have a look at how Fleet Street are reacting. And we start, I believe, with the Express. And the Express are splashing with Boris quits. Kangaroo court forces me out. That's a statement from the former Prime Minister in relation to his decision to leave, with many suggesting he jumped before he was pushed. The weekend, Boris Johnson declares war on Sunak as he quits Parliament. Daily Telegraph. Johnson quits as MP over Partygate. Former Prime Minister says Commons inquiry is a kangaroo court intent on forcing him out. I'm not alone in thinking, says Johnson, that there is a witch hunt underway against me to take revenge for Brexit. Which begs the question, is this a Remainer coup? Let me know on email, please, mark@gbnews.com. Furious Boris quits as MP and blames Tory witch hunt. And there he is on the front page of The Independent, pictured with Nadine Dorries. We thought that was the big story of the day. Former Culture Secretary stepping down from the Commons, sparking a by-election in Bedfordshire, 24,000 majority safe seat, which the Tories could also lose. The Daily Mirror. Shamed ex-PM resigns as MP. Johnson quits over Partygate. Deluded Tory claims he's been forced out after seeing Commons report. No sympathy from the Mirror. We've also got the Times newspaper. The party's over now. Johnson quits as MP. And with a little bit of much-needed levity on this very busy political day, the party's over for Bozo. Shamed clown steps down after number 10 COVID probe. Fibber claims blah, blah, blah. Whatever. Those are your front pages. We'll bring you the Mail shortly, but let's get reaction from my pundits. I'm delighted to welcome Emma Wolfe, who is a broadcaster and political commentator, GBNews star and Conservative Party member Albi Amankona, and the aggressively neutral writer and historian David Oldroyd Bolt, the king of balance. Folks, let's get our teeth into this, and let's talk about the idea, David, that this could be a Remainer coup. Boris Johnson saying he's being punished for Brexit.
I don't think that's true. I just think this is Boris Johnson receiving due comeuppance for being Boris Johnson, ignoring the rules which he put in place, which, as was said earlier, other people had to abide by, even though we knew it was wrong. Even though we knew that it was ineffectual, Boris Johnson kept those rules in place. And I think the idea that this is some vast Remainer conspiracy is simply for the birds. Well, Johnson has said in his very angry and long statement, my removal is the necessary first step to challenging Brexit. I'm afraid I no longer believe that it's any coincidence that Sue Gray, who investigated gatherings in Number 10, is now the Chief of Staff designate of the Labour leader. So if it's not a Remain coup, it is potentially a coup from the left. I think it's a coup of the establishment who dislike Boris Johnson for being, as it were, a disruptor. But Rishi Sunak campaigned vociferously for Brexit. Yeah. He's been in the US trying to get a trade deal. This is a Prime Minister who I don't particularly hold a candle for Rishi Sunak. I think he's a typical product of his school. He's a managerialist rather than a leader. But he is at least trying to reap some benefit of Brexit. So the idea that this is some vast coup I simply don't think holds water. But what it probably is the establishment getting its own back on Boris Johnson in some way, while at the same time holding him to account for the actions he perpetrated, which were then illegal, even if the morality of the law in question is something we all know held no water at all. For sure. Going further into this very long statement, Albi Amankona, Boris Johnson writes, when I left office last year, the government was only a handful of points behind in the polls. That gap has now massively widened, quite a dig against Sunak. Just a few years after winning the biggest majority in almost half a century, that majority is now clearly at risk. Our party needs urgently to recapture its sense of momentum and its belief in what this country can do. That doesn't really help Rishi Sunak, does it, criticising the current situation?
But I would ask Boris, who got us into the current situation, who has been the Prime Minister most of the time since 2019, who won that majority and then completely wasted it. I think one of the things that I hear from Conservative Party members over and over again, which is not something which we often hear in the airwaves, is that a lot of us feel very let down by Boris. We supported him, we campaigned for him, we backed him, we wanted him to deliver for the people of Britain, and then he got this massive majority and completely wasted it.
Listen, what do you think about parallels with Donald Trump, Emma Wolfe? Clearly, Trump accused of more grave crimes, but Boris quits, says the Express. Kangaroo court forces me out. There is something slightly Trumpian about Boris's response. Could he become a political martyr off the back of this?
I'm not sure about that. And I think when you suggest, is it a Remainer coup, I think Boris Johnson has a lot of enemies. He's not someone that we know, that he's not someone that made friends, didn't really bother to spend much time, chumming around in the House of Commons. I don't think he bothers there much at all. I think he's much more interested in being either at home with Carrie and the children,
making more.
Or making more children, or let's just not go there. Or doing whatever else he does when he's not with Carrie, and let's not even go there. But I don't think he's someone that spent a lot of time in the bars and hanging around and making friends. And when push comes to shove, it means that you don't have people to fall back on you. Yes, of course there are Boris allies and there are Boris... I'm just thinking about the people... I mean, what a weird twist of fate that his resignation honours list is being published today as it comes out, within hours of him leaving the House of Commons in anger. And surely if you've been honoured today, I think of Lord Rees-Mogg, how do you feel about that now? Does it not devalue that honour?
Yeah, you do wonder about that. And, of course, we thought, Emma Wolfe, that the big story of the day was going to be Nadine Dorries stepping down.
And if you look at the front of the Telegraph, she's been shoved down right to the bottom to a little postage-size stamped story about being shoved out.
Is this potentially a storm in a teacup? And does it do Sunak a favour with Johnson out of the scene?
I don't think it's that bad news. Someone earlier, one of your many, many brilliant commentators earlier, they all blur into one now. Someone earlier said, actually, it's not that bad for Rishi Sunak. I don't think it is that bad. He's above it all, isn't he? He's off doing...
Well, Edwina said that he's out of the Commons now.
I think Albie said it as well. I think once all this is over and once it is tomorrow's fish and chip paper, maybe this will be good for Rishi Sunak. Get rid of all the kind of, the swirling around the Boris Johnson stuff.
Well, yes. I mean, any return...
You can never predict anything.
Of course you can't. Any return for Boris, though, Albie Amankona, as a top Tory insider, you'll know, would require the largesse of another constituency association, possibly his old constituency of Henley. But is it a given that they'd have him back in a year's time?
Look, I would never try to predict the behaviour of Tory constituency association. They will have a list of candidates and they will all be treated equally in that process.
Christopher Hope from
but I think exactly
he doesn't think that it's likely.
And I think what Chris Hope actually said is the most interesting thing, which is, of course, that CCHQ has all of these back channels to actually maybe influence the outcome of some of these selection processes. And that, of course, is run by one of Rishi Sunak's allies, the chairman of the party. So I think it's quite unlikely that after Boris Johnson steps down as an MP that he would be adopted as a candidate for the next general election.
So he has said, I'm out of politics for now, which is a major clue that the sequel is coming. The comeback is already
he just doesn't want to close the door on it completely. But you have to remember, in the last... I know I've mentioned it before about his cash. In the last few months, he's made something like 4 or 5 million in terms of public speaking and those kind of engagements. Why would he swap that for, what is it, 80 grand, 90 grand? What do they get?
Political ambition.
He's just bought a house, a huge, great big moated house in Oxfordshire, cunningly close to Henley, for something like 3 or 4 million.
But I think maybe it's time to stop saying you can never count Boris Johnson out. I mean, the number of times I've said that on television over the last few years...
Become a cliche, hasn't it?
I just think maybe this is it for Boris. Could we fathom a world where actually maybe Boris Johnson isn't coming back? He's stepping down as an MP. He's been disgraced in the last year as a Tory. And I honestly find it difficult to see a route back for him for the first time ever.
David Oldroyd-Bolt, what about this noise that I'm hearing on WhatsApp from a couple of very respected political insiders who say Nadine Dorries resigned earlier, talk of other Tory MPs standing down immediately, although I understand my people are saying that Priti Patel is not on political suicide watch, that she is going to stay in the Commons. But rumours Boris is going to launch his own party in the near future. Your reaction? Is that one for the birds or is it credibility?
I think there is credibility in that. And on the comparison between President Trump and Mr Johnson, the great comparison between them is that they are not party men. They don't give a damn about the parties that they have represented.
And neither are proper Conservatives.
Well, no, Andrew T.C. Davies saying that Boris Johnson's a Conservative and cares about the party is absolutely risible. He's not a Conservative. He doesn't care about the party, other than as a vehicle for his own political ambition. So he will hitch his wagon to anything that gives him a chance of returning to office and to power. And I think that it's entirely likely that the people who are close to him and who have been his loyalists would go with him because, the Conservative Party is going to lose the next election. It's going to lose it heavily. So they have nothing to lose. If they cross the aisle, cross the floor of the House and sit with, say, Reform or as an independent Conservative bloc or a Johnsonian bloc, whatever they call themselves, it doesn't matter. It doesn't harm the Conservative Party.
Judging by the vote on the Windsor Framework, the rebellion was less than 20. And he allegedly had 100 supporters behind him when Liz Truss stood down. That is an 80% decrease in parliamentary support.
He got that 100 by a whisker.
By a whisker. So I just think this idea that there's this group of Tory MPs that are going to be able to bring down Rishi Sunak.
I'm not saying that at all. I don't think it'll be a large group.
Is nonsense.
No, I don't think I'm not saying that at all. It's not going to be a large group. It's going to be a desperate last-ditch effort by some people to ally themselves to a man that they think could have a political future. But it won't bring Sunak down. He's done that himself.
But I think if they came to him and said, we want you to lead this party, that this is this wonderful coalition, will you be our leader? That's one thing. I don't think Boris Johnson is going to sit down, start planning, and he doesn't have the focus and concentration to actually put his mind to putting together the organisation of a party himself. But I think if a group of people came to him and said, be our glorious leader, you're a glorious leader, that's what he likes to do.
Is there a political future for Boris Johnson? Is there a way back? Do you want to see him back in the front line of British politics? What are the implications for the outcome of the next general election? Is the only winner now the cervix-free leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer? Let me know your thoughts on that, Mark, at gbnews.com. After the break, we've got tomorrow's Mail newspaper with an explosive headline. Looking forward to reading that one to you. And we've got The Guardian as well, who are in full gloat mode. Plus, I'm delighted to say we'll be joined by another top former Tory MP who knows the inner workings of that party better than most. This is a Tories in Turmoil special. I'll see you in 2.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back to a Mark Dolan Tonight Tories in Turmoil special with the political bombshell news that Boris Johnson is immediately stepping down as a Member of Parliament. He will spark a by-election in his constituency. It's a marginal constituency in London and will likely be another political blow to Rishi Sunak. Big reaction on email before we get to more of the papers. This from Louise, who was actually damning. Louise says, Mark, enough about Boris Johnson's resignation. As far as I'm concerned, it's good riddance because it was Johnson who introduced the green agenda and net zero that I certainly did not vote for. He was a rubbish Prime Minister, no leadership qualities whatsoever. Graham says, what about shifty Starmer's Beergate now? Eileen, good evening, Eileen. Thanks for emailing the show. Eileen says, I hope Boris comes back with a new party. Always Boris, never Sunak. He will not get my vote. Boris Johnson owns the red wall, says John. I, as part of the Red Wall, voted for Boris, not the Conservatives. Mark, this has been well thought through, says Graham. Like with America, this is a battle for the very fabric of democracy. Rod has emailed, Mark, the Conservative Party no longer care about Conservative voters. So roll on, Boris. We need a new centre-right party. And who better to lead it than Boris himself? Look, I'll get to more of your emails shortly because they are coming in thick and fast. Let's have a look at tomorrow's Mail newspaper now. And they lead with the only story in town. Boris, I've been forced out by a witch hunt. Ex-PM quits as MP with blast at Kangaroo Court. He says his ousting sets a dangerous and unsettling precedent, claims a political hit job is revenge for Brexit, and attacks the Tories for endlessly putting up tax. There you go. Well, look, let's now speak to a former Conservative MP, a man who only left the Commons himself a matter of months ago. I'm delighted to welcome Neil Parish to the programme. Neil, what does this mean for the Tories?
Yeah, I mean, I think he is a huge character, Boris, and it's a great shame to see him actually leave the House of Commons. But I think he had no choice in the end when the privileged committees were basically ruled against him. It would have driven it to a by-election, a recall, and a by-election would have been called. So Boris has gone. I mean, he was a huge titan of politics. I mean, I remember sort of back in 2019 when we couldn't get a general election, we couldn't get Parliament dissolved, we couldn't get Brexit done, and there's no doubt that Boris, he actually, he drove the agenda, and he perhaps in some ways broke the rules in order to get that done. So therefore, he was a man, I suppose, in the end, that probably didn't adhere to the rules. That was partly that made him attractive, but of course, in the end, the system's got him. Do I think that it's a conspiracy by Remainers? No, I don't actually, but I think the problem that Boris had is that he had no choice but to resign. Do I think that he'll create another party? He may, but the first past the post system in the House of Commons, it's quite difficult to do that. And I think the Tory MPs, mainly now with a general election only probably a year away, will largely rally round Rishi Sunak. So it's going to be interesting to see what Boris does. But there has got to be some sadness in all of us because he is a hell of a character. Now, I don't try and defend some of what he did, and I think he was a little economical, shall I say, with the truth sometimes. But there is a great loss of character to Parliament, and of course the opposition are crowing like mad. But I wouldn't get too excited about that, Mark. That comes and goes quite quickly, and I think perhaps in some ways it may be easier for Rishi Sunak in the long run. We will see.
Do you think now a Labour victory at the next election is a certainty, Neil?
Only if Boris was to set up another party and split the vote on the right. If he does not, I suspect it could actually make life slightly easier. It's going to be difficult for Rishi Sunak to win a general election because
one more
all that's going on. But I think, as long as the Tory party doesn't split itself in two, then I believe it still has a fighting chance.
Neil, if we can, let's bring my pundits into this conversation. Albie Amankona, Emma Wolfe and David Oldroyd Bolt. And I'd like to read this email to all of you because the emails to this programme are the most important content of the show because it's my viewers and listeners. And Alison says, your pundits tonight are all a bunch of disgraceful idiots. Nasty, vindictive and biased. Boris did not attend parties. He had a piece of cake. As for honours, those people deserved them. The civil service don't. And Sunak is a backstabbing snake who has not been voted for by anyone. Neil Parish, Boris is angry, and so are his supporters.
Yes, they are. And there are people that would literally die in a ditch for Boris. But I think the problem you've got is, and Boris has got, is that your political capital wanes, and it wanes very quickly, especially in Parliament. And Parliament and the Tory party now facing an election will come together, I suspect. And so I think Nadine Dorris standing down, you see, that wasn't a coincidence either, but I suspect there won't be mass resignations. I'm not sure there's too many kamikazes left to bomb the ship. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here. But I think, I can understand that Boris supporters are fanatical, there is no doubt, but they are not in the majority now. And I think that is the issue.
Rishi Sunak, David Oldroyd Bolt, hold up at number 10. I'm not sure, is he back from America? But he'll certainly be at number 10 shortly. He needs to make a plan. What is his best next step, do you think?
His best next step is to ignore entirely anything that Boris Johnson says or does. And to your viewers who are annoyed about what's happened, and they are, as Mr Parrish said, a dwindling minority, and they are fanatics and zealots, I'm sorry, but Boris Johnson is not a Conservative, and if you think he is, and if you think he would lead a party in a Conservative manner, you did not pay attention to what he did while he was, in fact, the Conservative Prime Minister. Mr Sunak doesn't have to do anything. Johnson has committed harikiri, to continue the Japanese metaphor, and is now of absolutely no concern whatsoever in day-to-day politics. He's still, of course, a public figure. That's not going to change, and he's still a charismatic and, to some people, a rather winning figure. But I think to the majority of people, he's now a political irrelevance.
Albi Amankona, what happens to those pro-Boris Tories on the backbenches now without their hero next to them?
I think it's difficult to say what's going to happen to the pro-Boris Tories now.
Will they go stumm like Kelvin McKenzie said they should?
I don't know that they will go stumm. There's certainly some very colourful characters on the backbenches. Our colleague Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course. There is now Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. Excuse me, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. Dame Priti Patel, Dame Andrea Jenkin, all known as being very thoughtful and loud Conservative figures when they want to be. So I'm sure they will be both supporting the government but also not being too shy of criticising the government when they want to.
Yes. Emma Wolf, what do you think, especially for the floating voter, what do you think the public will make of this? Those who haven't decided which way they're going to vote in a year's time.
I should apologise. I ennobled Mr Rees-Mogg earlier on. It should be Sir, and he's not a Lord. I'm sure that'll come in time.
Matter of time.
Matter of time. What do people do? I don't know. I don't know what people do, and I think there are still fanatical Boris Johnson supporters out there. The thing is about Boris Johnson, I'm not angry. To address Alison's very interesting email there, I'm not angry that he had a slice of birthday cake or that he sat there with some tepid white wine or orange juice in number 10 for 15 minutes during lockdown. I'm angry that he made those ludicrous rules up and wrecked the country and subjected the rest of us to insane, ridiculous restrictions. And I think a lot of people are fed up with that aspect, not that whether or not he actually broke those rules himself, because we know that he did.
Well, this is a great test, isn't it, for the Prime Minister going forward, Neil? What do you think the mood of the party will be? Briefly, if you can.
Yeah, I think in the end the party will be sad that Boris is going, many will be, but I think they will pull themselves together because the general election's looming and nothing, dare I say it, unites the party more than the shock of having to go to the country and face the electorate. So I'm being blunt now. I think you'll find most of them will pull themselves together, especially if they're standing. It's the ones that are standing down which will have the most to say. Those that are standing at the next election will come together because they will, you either hang together or you hang separately. That's what happens in politics. It's very cruel at the end of the day.
Neil Parrish, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a night of political drama. Thank you to all my guests, particularly my brilliant pundits and my amazing team who tore up the running order at 8 o'clock and created a brand new show. Greg and everybody involved, thank you and well done. But most importantly to you for your company on TV and on radio. We're back tomorrow at 9. Headliners is next.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.